Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Everyone, welcome back to another episode of The Shaded Youth. As usual, we have another special guest on for this week. We have on the one and only Tanzim Alam from Australia. We haven't hit that country yet, so this is the first time. Alhamdulillah. So Tanzim is one of the hosts for a very special podcast. I've been listening to it for a while now, and it's, mashallah, like truly incredible. They're doing a lot of good work with, all the guests that they bring on. And it's actually one of the top, not just Muslim podcasts, but also just top podcasts in Australia as well. So without further ado, Tanzim from Boys in the Cave. Assalamu alaikum, man. How are you?
Walaikum salam, doing well. How are you going?
Alhamdulillah, man. So I always like to start off, asking one very basic question. Some guests like the question, some guests hate it. But basically, who are you, Tanzim? And you can answer that however you like. And could you also just speak a little bit about what you do and why it's important to you?
That's a really tough one. I think in some ways, Alhamdulillah, Allah sort of blessed me in a place where I'll be able to sort of have my feet in a lot of different sort of areas and fields and spaces. So for example, I guess the general background is in terms of study. I studied commerce at University of New South Wales. In terms of community activism, I've been part of the MSA at that university. You want to still be MSA, and it's really that story in of itself is an interesting one. How I got sort of involved, because I wasn't too much into Dean. I don't know how the sort of schooling structure is in America, but here in Australia, it's like you have high school, HSC, and then you go into university. And so I wasn't really much into Dean too much. I guess my family did have those kind of have those Islamic principles and foundations, growing up. But at the same time, it wasn't like too much into Deen in the sense of studying it properly or that kind of thing. It was just kind of you have these set of values as a Muslim growing up, and that's how you should live by. But essentially, actually getting into Deen was like at university through MSA. And right now I'm just working as supply chain graduate as well, so I have that sort of professional background. But at the same time, in terms of my podcast, that's something that we and one of my closest friends, we started at university. I think I was like second or third year university at that time. And on top of that, I do have a lot of sort of marketing background. I did some marketing stuff for other organizations. So yeah, I've got like a mix of, a lot of different things. And in terms of, I guess, interests and fields of interest, I think I've discussed like philosophy, psychology, temperaments all on the podcast. So it's like, yeah, as I said, I just have my feet in like a lot of different sort of areas. I think in that way, it's like, I think it's a blessing to be in, because like, for example, I have that kind of commerce, business, finance background. Then I can kind of draw my experiences and ideas from philosophy, tie that with psychology. I think it's a unique position to have, just able to access those fields of knowledge and also draw from it as well. So I guess alhamdulillah, I've been blessed in that sense. That's kind of and I guess to add it in, like I play a lot of cricket as well. That's kind of my pastime in terms of sports. So yeah, I try to go gym as well. So there's that kind of just dimension to my background. So I said a lot there, but it's just to give a rough idea of who I am, as a person, and the sort of things that I'm interested in and where I've studied and what my background is in general.
Of course, man. Jazakallah khair for getting into all of that. So I don't think you mentioned it, but I know that you're Bengali, right?
Yeah.
So I'm also Bengali.
Mashallah, mashallah. That's it.
Mashallah,
Bangla Ummah.
that's an
Bangla Ummah do
achievement
me
right
proud.
there.
Yeah. It's I was
Of
having a
course.
chat with a few of the guys, because like friends with Maheen. Also, if I know Dili Hussain, maybe you're familiar with him from
Yeah,
UK.
Dilly
Yeah,
Hussein.
so
He's straight
we're
up
all
Silagi,
Bengali.
bro. I love him.
Yeah. So it's like all these, like, mashallah, it's good to see, because I was having a chat with them where essentially I find that especially with Bengalis, you don't find, like, growing up, right, when you look to Muslim figures in the community, I think the only one that's Bengali is like Sheikh. I don't know if you know, if you've heard of him, Tawfiq Chowdhury from.
Tawfiq
He's a
Chaudhry,
Bengali.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah, he's like the only Bengali that I've heard growing up. That's like a Dawah figure. But everyone else is like Indian, Pakistani.
yeah,
Like Zakir Naik, for example, growing up, everyone heard of him, but he's like Indian. But yeah, it's really hard to find Bengalis. So it's really good to actually see Bengalis get into the whole kind of Dawah sphere in general, especially because like our history, it's tough for our families in general, like from 1971 war migrating to the west. It's a struggle, right? So I think
yeah.
that's a big reason as to why we were behind a bit in terms of dawah carriers or global dawah carriers. And so alhamdulillah, now like we've seen a lot of like content creators of Bengalis and getting into that space. So it's really really good to see. I know the Bengali community is huge in America, and I've got family in America as well. So
Oh, nice, nice. What
yeah,
part of
yeah,
America?
Jackson
Jackson
Heights,
Heights,
bro.
of course, man.
And
I
I've got
actually
a
I live in New
my
York,
my
so it's Jackson
yeah.
Heights is right there.
Oh, mashallah, yeah. And I've got like Chachu, like my uncle.
Yeah,
He
of course.
lives in Houston as well. So yeah, got some
Uh,
family out in America. So yeah.
nice. New York and Texas are like the Medina and Mecca of America, right?
Yeah, I heard. I
Move to
heard.
one and then you do hijrah to Texas. That's what everyone's been doing recently. But yeah, mashallah, like it's exactly as you said, man. Like I haven't really seen too many Bengali figures growing up, like in the Dawa scene at least. And Tawfiq Chaudhry was someone that I've heard of, but the main guy that I really grew up on was Sheikh Hassan Ali from the UK as well. I
Mm.
don't know if you're familiar with him.
I'm familiar with him. Yeah, I
Yeah,
like him as well.
he's
Yeah.
he's really popular with Silitis, especially because like he always has like really funny humor, and like the way we talk is like it's just funny to me, right? Um, so yeah, it's amazing to see, man. What part of Bangladesh are you from?
So family from Dhaka, but villages
Gotcha.
in do you know Feni? It's on like the other side. There's like two parts of India. So a
Yeah,
lot of people don't know this. It's like there's a main India, which everyone knows, and there's
yeah,
like a little bit of India on the other side of
yeah,
Bangladesh.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, so Feni's like on the border. So that's kind of my dad's side of the family, the villages are there. But yeah, like most of like Dhaka like was situated. Most of my family, yeah.
Gotcha, dope, bro. So I mean, you come from a Bengali background. Of course, you were raised Australian, but I can kind of see how some of our experience might be a bit similar. So, out of curiosity, you said you were going to commerce, and that kind of background, the business world. Was that something that your parents pushed you into, or was that something you wanted to go straight into yourself? And like, what were some of the reasons for that?
Oh, that's a good question. So in terms of growing up, for some reason, it's really interesting. Like you've probably had this as well. I think Bengali families and parents really have this hyperfixation on education, which obviously is,
Yeah,
mashallah, it's a very admirable thing. But I think a lot of it is informed by trauma in the sense that because in Bangladesh, the sufferings that we have had to endure as a community and as people, and in that state we weren't in the best in socioeconomic circumstances, and a lot of our families, especially in the villages, had to struggle, right? And so we had this particular time, I think it was around the 1990s or 80s, around then, where after like 1971 a lot of Bengalis emigrated to like different parts of the west. And in the Australian context, what happened is essentially in Australia, they were just trying to find people to bring in so that the economic status can improve, and so that they can have workers and grow as an economy here in Australia. And so they pretty much accepted anyone. Like apparently, I heard situations of people that came in because of having skills of hair cutting, for example, right? And so a lot of Bengalis came in that during that time, and my dad as well. So my grandfather was like worked in the embassies and stuff, so he went all around the world. So my dad was like growing up, went like all over the world, apparently like even Tokyo. It was unheard of at that time. And during 1971 he was actually in Pakistan as well, just escaping that situation there. So he was all parts of the world. And my mum as well, like she married pretty young, so coming to Australia, having like a new life from their perspective, it's like we need to make most of this. We need to establish something, right? It's that kind of reaction in terms of what they saw back home, especially not just that, but it's just seeing the rest of the family. Like from my perspective, from my family circles, I'm one of the only few that actually am living in the West. Like I've got a lot of like I can distant cousins, as I said, live in America, but my immediate family, most of them pretty much still live in Bangladesh. So it's like I'm the only one from my sort of family because I don't have any cousins. I do have one cousin in Sydney, but we don't have many family in Australia. So it's like we need to make the most of ourselves. It's like we need to try to work as hard as possible because I think there's also pressure as well to someone provide for family back home. So I guess the natural reaction is I'm tying this all together. People might be thinking, why is he going around this tangent? But it's
No,
just
no,
to get
I'm
that
I've listened
context.
to your voice for like 5 hours, like every day for the past month, so I'm used to this.
Yeah, and so essentially the reaction is we need to make sure our kids have the best education to get a good job, right? And so the reaction in that sense is like I'm going to do as much as I can from my own will in order so for my kids to have the best opportunities to do well in the society, which is admirable as I mentioned, right? But at the same time it's like it's still not addressing the sort of trauma that they've experienced, but it's more like a reaction, and the reaction is more monetary and status based if anything. So anyways, so for me growing up, I mashallah, my parents spent so much like time and effort on my studies, spent a lot of money on tutoring. I think I used to tell this to my friends where I think there's a little bit of privilege involved in the sense that since we're like kind of middle class, I myself, I'm not the quickest of learners. I'm a very slow learner in terms of learning new concepts and ideas. And so it's sometimes difficult if you're a slow learner and you go through the education system. What tends to happen is essentially you are more prone to fall behind in terms of learning new content, especially at school. And so the sort of propensity to do well at school level becomes diminished a lot because you're competing with people that are very quick learners. And so I guess the idea is that people learn in different styles, right? And the schooling system isn't necessarily catered. But since, my parents, for example, and when I was in year 7, I was basically doing year 10 maths, like it's like a
Nice.
huge
Okay.
jump. Yeah, like that kind of level of tutoring that I had, like there was no reason for me not to do well, purely because like my parents spent a lot of money on me. And yeah, like I just had it easy in that sense, alhamdulillah. Um, and so in that my parents always had this mental picture. And I guess I realize that now I'm empathetic in terms of why they have that, but they just had that vision of the child going to a good uni, going to a good school, and then good uni, and then having that sort of 9 to 5 job where they see their son coming home with a suit and tie and a briefcase or something, right? Like that's literally how that was essentially the dream growing up when I was a young kid, right? And they wanted to see that eventuate or actually happen. And so in that they actually wanted me to become like an engineer. I don't know, I think it's like a Bengali thing, right?
I mean, for me it
Doctor,
was
yeah.
doctor, but it's one of those.
Yeah, it's one or the other,
Yeah.
right? And so because I realized like because I was relatively alhamdulillah good at maths like for primarily my primary school and high school life, and so they just figured, oh, okay, yeah, like out of the two, doctor or engineer, just become engineer because you're good at maths or something.
Mm.
And I guess I internalized that for a while until I'm just like, wait a minute, I don't even know what an engineer does. Like this was like like what do they even do? I don't like buildings. After I looked into it, like what am I doing? Why am I accepting this kind of thing? So for me, I was kind of an autopilot as well because it's like, okay, yeah, like I don't, like I want to do something. I don't know what to do, but I just kind of cruising by. So I ended up, but then at the same time, it's like, hey, I like it, commerce, economics. I like studying that. Hey, I think I'm decent at maths. So put the two together. I think commerce is decent, and I think commerce is like the sort of option a lot of people take if they aren't doing, they aren't trying to become an engineer or doctor. Like commerce seems like the kind of fallback option. So I was kind of like me. And so, yeah, I just sort of picked that in that sense of in university, studying commerce, major in finance. I think looking back, it's my sort of suggestion for people is not to just pick a university degree for the sake of it. Like if I was looking back, I wouldn't have. I know, like it sounds controversial, but I wouldn't have gone to uni straight away after high school
Okay.
because I would have probably worked in random jobs to just get a feel of the industries, different industries, to see what I like before picking a university subject. Because I don't know how the system is in Sydney, in sorry Australia, not Australia, America,
America, yeah.
but they, university, I heard like the university fees are really high as well, right, for subjects.
Yeah,
And
it's crazy. I mean, in New York, it's a bit better. That's because we're a huge city, and there's like a lot of um like government funding to help you out, so that we have financial aid and whatnot. And also, there's this like centralized university system called CUNY, City University of New York, and a lot of my friends have gone to that instead, where the prices are a lot lower. But generally, for like most of America, it's incredible. Like it's ridiculous how high the fees are.
exactly right, because at the end of the day, people don't realize that university is a business. Like
Yeah,
universities are a business. They want to make money out of you, right? And
yeah,
so for some reason, because how, like, this is another whole tangent conversation get into, where society, the way it's structured, it's built to make people become capitalist workers essentially. Like
mm,
that's how it's structured, from how we learn. And because this kind of ties into temperaments, right? Because I've been thinking about this recently. It's like the melancholic kind of temperament, or the melancholic choleric sort of temperament, are probably the ones that are the most diligent workers.
gotcha.
And they'll tend to, especially in, you'll find, for example, in schooling sort of environments, they'll tend to excel as well, because books is, learning is their element at times, right? And they're also naturally good workers. So like if they tend to do well at university, they'll tend to do well um, in the workplace as well, in the way they work.
Yeah,
It's like churning out those kind of people so that they can kind of pretty much, corporations can exploit
yeah,
them
yeah.
essentially, right?
Well,
And
sorry,
so
just to stop you, just for anyone that doesn't know what the temperaments are, could you give like a brief synopsis on that? I know like
that's
you did like 2 hours of a podcast
yeah.
going over, but like a brief definition of what they are, and like the four of them.
Yeah, it's a good question. I guess very succinctly, so people, if someone's like very new to the whole
Yeah,
subject area,
which a lot of people are.
yeah, it's really hard to, like, I found this out recently, where you have to be very simplistic, and you have to try to use, like, the way I use it and describe it now is like, I don't know, Avatar. There's 4 elements, like the fire, earth, air, water, and
Yeah,
people are around that, based on those archetypes, male and female. So
yeah,
essentially, the water type is different. A water type person, or let's just say water type male, is different to a fire male. Like
mm,
the way you people perceive fire to be, that's how the fire temperament is. And however you perceive water to be, like cool, calm, collected, that's how the sort of water phlegmatic temperament is. So that's how I try to sort of depict what the temperaments are.
yeah, yeah. So it was phlegmatic, melancholic, choleric, and
Sanguine.
sanguine. Yeah. So for fire, it'd be like choleric, melancholic would be earth, phlegmatic would be water, and sanguine would be air.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
yeah,
And so you taking that into mind, because I think this is another discussion where people, because I've seen a lot of people try to, reject, not just, I'm not talking about 4 temperaments, but different modes of knowledge.
yeah,
But as Muslims, if haqq and truth is everywhere, you'll find it in even these kind of fields of knowledge. And
of
so
course.
us as Muslims are like, our job is to excavate it, because as Muslims, we're healers, right? We go into, like, it's around, I think even Sina had the text, it's called The Healing. And that's really fascinating, because he incorporated like philosophical concepts and try
Yeah,
to
I mean, he himself
depict
was
the,
a physician.
exactly,
That
yeah.
makes complete sense.
Yeah, and in that context of the book, essentially what he's trying to do is excavate like Islamic ideals from, philosophical concepts from like the Greek philosophy. And so that's how I kind of as Muslims, that's how it should be. I know there's the kind of fear of, oh, look, you get into this field of science, your aqidah is at stake or something. But I think that's kind of scare tactics at times, or insecurity even at times. But in saying that, it's like, as Muslims, we should be actually using and getting into and knowing and understanding all these kind of different fields of knowledge, because you can kind of extract them when you need to. How I perceive it is essentially instrumentalizing different fields of knowledge for the
Mm-hmm.
sake of Islam and Deen. And yeah, like that's how I found our scholars of the past were to be. And so I try that's inspiration, I guess. Allah sort of put me in ways where I've been in, able to have my hand in different fields and sort of draw upon that. But that's how I sort of approach it. What was my the
So
initial
yeah,
question? I
so we,
forgot.
we we
Went
were
off on a
initially,
tangent.
yeah, no, we were initially talking about why you chose to go into commerce,
Okay,
and
right.
I
Yeah.
actually had a follow-up question that ties both of these things together. So I remember you recently graduated, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so I think on Twitter I responded like, "Oh, did you get your degree in philosophy?" And you responded back, "No, it was in commerce," which I was a bit surprised by. So I wanted to ask you if you, and actually I think you said I should have done philosophy though, or something like that, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So I wanted to ask you, do you regret that degree in commerce? And also, would you tell people to get that degree in philosophy, or whatever they actually are interested in, rather than something that's marketable and that's generally perceived as a respectable career in society?
Yeah, yeah. Good question. Before I answer that question, I now
Yeah,
remembered what I
you
was
can
trying
finish
to
your point.
initial.
Sorry.
Yeah, no, all good, all good. So essentially with workers, how it in society they're trying to churn out good workers for the capitalist system, essentially, right? And that's almost how universities operate, where it's like a business as well, trying to make money off you in that kind of journey to become a capitalist worker. And
Mm,
so as you kind of articulated with the American context where fees are high, even in Australia. So what's happening is this is another kind of discussion in of itself, where they're making STEM degrees like science and technology, engineering, mathematics subjects, or any kind of fields related to that. They're making the fees for that cheaper so that people do that and assist the economy. And in terms of like other fields of knowledge like sociology and those kind of fields of science as well, arts degrees in that, they're hiking up the fees a lot, like they're making it a lot higher. So
mm,
it's really interesting. It's like we're seeing a phasing out of actual like knowledge or seeking of knowledge, from the perspective of things that will probably like even benefit the Muslim community more. It's being phased out so that less people can are doing it, so that they have to choose in becoming, I don't know, mathematicians or scientists or whatever,
right.
so they can help the economy. And we're seeing that play out. And so
Rather
in
than
that
like
process,
philosophy or the humanities, or actually about
exactly.
like critical thinking. Yeah, gotcha.
And that's, I guess, how that the society we live in, that's what it's doing, and it's pushing people to be, right? And so for us, it's like we have to just be careful that we don't jump into a degree for the sake of it, and having to pay all these high uni fees straight away. So for me, my regret was like, I guess it's not really a regret now, like alhamdulillah, like things worked out, so I'm not like too fussed in that sense. But I guess in terms of the perspective of being a bit more smart in the way I approach my trajectory in life, I would have definitely probably worked different things and done different things before actually committing to what subject I want to study at university. It could be anything, like it could be just, I don't know, being part of a psychology clinic or something, or being part of, a marketing on a team, or any sort of, it's so easy now. Like you don't actually, people think that you need a degree to get into these spaces, but
Mm-hmm,
you can just do like any job in those things and get that experience and work your way up. And you'll be
mm-hmm.
surprised, like in a lot of those kind of places you don't actually need degrees, so people have that barrier in mind. And so for me, it's like I would have just put my tried my hand in a lot of different fields of knowledge before, or different areas, or areas and fields of work, before actually committing to something and then deciding what I want to do at uni. Because it would have been for me, I think in terms of my learning styles, like hands-on anyway. So it's like if I have that experience, I can kind of draw from it and navigate life. So I think that'd be my recommendation for people, especially as you mentioned, uni fees being high and all that. And yeah, in terms of the question, so yeah, so for me, I just sort of picked finance and sort of did that, did it part-time as well. and also had a lot of experiences along the way as well, because I worked for different, organizations, institutions, companies as well. I think the most two rememberable ones perhaps is like where I learned the most. First year uni, just to get by. I basically did like door-to-door sales. That was like a really interesting time. Like we were doing like charity door-to-door sales basically.
Mm,
And I learned a lot of skills from that, like a lot of people skills, and that really shaped me. Because man, like if you're doing door-to-door in hot days, it's like you don't want to be there. It's like you're like dying out in the heat. But in that, you sort of learn to find ways and use your willpower to navigate those situations, and try to, because we were commission based as well, it's like you had to pretty much get a sale to get paid, right? So there's a lot of
gotcha.
pressure. So that I learned a lot from that. And in terms of communication skills, I also learned a lot. That was
I'm
like one that
assuming it
shaped me.
also I'm assuming it also helps you with like just accepting rejection, because I can kind of assume with door to door sales, there's probably a lot of people that weren't really welcoming, or kind of just didn't open the door, or whatnot, right?
Yeah. And now looking back, the temperaments would have helped me so much, but that's life, right? Like you sort of learn new experiences, and that, because it's like instead of assuming the worst of people, then you kind of start to sympathize and work accordingly as what you should do,
Yeah.
and what you should say according to the temperament. But that's a different discussion of itself. So that experience really shaped me in different ways, I think, till today. It's just like, because I had some, like, one of my lowest points is probably doing that job, to be honest, because it's like,
Mm,
you know 3 days of like, in the, I don't know, it's like 30 degrees Celsius here. That's like pretty hot, and it's like you're not getting a sale. It's like this life sucks. So, and in that, you just sort of, when you're in that hole, anything better, a little bit better, is a lot better. And I use that as a reference point. Like, if, for example, if I'm going through something tough now, in this day, like in the current context or current time, I use that as a reference point as well. It's like, look, things were way worse like 6 or 5 years ago. And yeah, like that's one experience. And the other experience I had, as I was doing my degree, was obviously Boys in the Cave as well. I'm learning a lot
mm.
of skills through that. But not only that, I also did some marketing stuff for another big organization here as well. So those kind of experiences, alhamdulillah, shaped me. And in terms of, I think can you just repeat your question again? Sorry.
So I was pretty much just asking, um, do you regret going into, commerce, or business, which I think you kind of answered already, and also like, why didn't you go into philosophy, which seems like to be, your biggest interest? And would you also like suggest people to just go into whatever they're actually interested in, stuff like philosophy, the arts, humanities, etc., rather than going to something that's, marketable and respected by society, something like commerce, or
Mm.
business, or you know
So the context of my university life and situation was that I initially did commerce and science. So I was doing a double degree,
mm,
but I dropped the science part because I was majoring in math, and then it became too much, to the sense that in terms of balancing the work-life balance and other extracurricular stuff, taking up something like mathematics or even engineering at university requires a lot of time and effort compared
mm,
to commerce, like a lot of time and effort. So around so I think second year I dropped the science part and I just did commerce, straight commerce. And because when I did that, I actually had electives left over.
mm,
So electives, basically, it's any subjects you can do from different
yeah, yeah.
faculties, and you can choose to do that as part of your degree as well. And so I think in one sense at that time, I'm like, I wish maybe perhaps I could have done, kept continuing the science degree, because if I didn't if I had a maths degree, for example, I guess corporate life, I can do a lot more different high paid jobs, all that kind of stuff. That, I think, that thought did come to mind. So I guess from the regret part, perhaps, maybe, but Allah sort of have different plans in some sense. So because of those electives, I ended up picking philosophy subjects, history subjects. I even did like feminism, global feminisms, as one of my
Mm,
subjects at university as well. Actually did, like, yeah, and I did two introductory psychology first year courses as well. So you can imagine, in my degrees, so in my university life, I ended up doing economics subjects, psychology subjects, philosophy subjects, history subjects, feminism subjects. So I had my foot in almost pretty much all faculties, if anything.
Yeah,
I even did
yeah.
math subjects as well, but that was because of my maths degree. I already had done a few maths subjects, and so that definitely shaped me positively for the better. So I guess from that perspective, I'm not I don't regret it. And I probably, like, looking back, I think a lot of decisions I made was just because I didn't have the knowledge.
Hmm.
So because there's this stigma, like, oh, you know, you do a philosophy degree, you won't get a job or something. But based on that sort of thinking, you sort of pick the STEM subjects like commerce and engineering. As a result, it's like, oh, stay away from that. And there's always a underlying joke, like they laugh, like a lot of the STEM degrees, like they laugh at people who do humanities, like, oh, you're not going to get
Hmm.
a job, why are you doing that, what a waste of time or something.
Yeah.
But I ended up finding out, like, because I have my friends that did degrees in the humanities, you know, they end up getting like government jobs, in the sense that, okay, look, you know, they even accept people from different backgrounds and degrees. So I didn't realize that there's that kind of opportunity there. And I guess if I knew about that before, I would have thought about it a bit differently. But you know, Allah has different plans. So yeah, it's, I think, I don't know about the American context, but basically my point is there's ways to kind of use your philosophy degree as well, or degree in the humanities, to actually get like decent corporate jobs to get by and provide. Because people think, oh, philosophy degree, you're gonna end up on the street or something. I don't know what the
Yeah.
stereotypes are. So that's why, you know, essentially I didn't even consider any of those subjects. But once I did them as my electives at university, they definitely helped me understand reality and the world a lot more. And especially, like, for example, you've probably heard on our podcast, we talk about feminism quite a bit. I don't want to get into
Mhm.
feminism too much because, you know, it's not,
Yeah, no, no,
I
it's
guess,
not a
right.
favorite subject of mine either.
But like, in the sense of the perceptions or stereotypes we have about what feminism is in society, I think after actually doing a university course
Hmm.
and speaking with lecturers and tutors around these sort of subjects, it really facilitated and opened me up to thinking, wait, like, the way I was perceiving it before is so narrow-minded and so simplistic, and I jumped the gun too much. And
Yeah,
so even on those perspectives, like, you know, it really helped me and shaped me as well. And especially like learning about history and philosophy, I had a lot of interesting encounters in my philosophy subjects, where people from all different backgrounds, like you have Marxists, you know, atheists, or even hardcore Christians, are all like in that same class of mine. And so one of the philosophy subjects that I did was pretty much dealing with things such as problem of evil, does God exist,
yeah,
God and evil, how does that work, and those kind of philosophical ideas in regards to those areas and fields of study. And so I learned a lot from that. I think it was a good eye opener in terms of what it is in those kind of spaces. And I had a lot of good debates and dialogues as well with other people. And you know, it's 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 funny because it's not like in those classes I'm like, hey, yeah, I'm Muslim. Maybe I might look it, but it's not like, yeah, I'm Muslim, I'm gonna fight the Islamic cause, right? You just sort of, if there's like, for example, God and evil, you're just gonna state like why you think your position's right. You don't actually say, hey, yeah, because I'm Muslim, da, 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 you know, because I guess what happens in wider society, they just think, you know, Islam's this kind of backward thing from the Middle East, and so they think that any arguments attached to or coming from Islam, it's probably backward. And so I think that stereotype did exist to some degree in my classes as well, when it comes to the perception of Islam. And so when they looked at me and kind of not from my own sort of argumentation, more just arguing what, you know, Ghazali put forth and all our scholars put forth, I think it really turned some heads in some ways. Like, whoa, like I didn't think of it like that. You get what I mean? So,
yeah, yeah,
like, for example, like, you know, if a Christian is gonna fall into issues debating God is good, and it's like the Muslim, you know, they for example, I don't know, a Marxist atheist sort of comes up to you and it's just like, oh, you Muslims think, you know, God is good. And I'm like, what do you mean? And then it's like you question that whole framework, and then they're just like, oh, okay. Because, you know, in Islamic, you know, theology, we don't kind of, because God also created evil as well. So it's not like we
Yeah.
can just say God is good. You know what I mean? Like there's different conceptions of God in the sense of
Yeah.
his attributes and stuff like that. So it's like there's sort of they've already assumed what Islam says about these subjects. So it was an interesting
Yeah.
encounter in
I've
that
I've
sense as
kind
well.
of learned that most of these questions, it can it can really just be answered by not really answering them, because the questions
Yes,
themselves are
yes,
flawed, right? Because they
yeah,
always have a preconception of who God is, and they try to put it on you, and then you make the error of answering that question, right?
yeah,
And then you kind of end up looking not like a fool, but they're gonna say you didn't really answer my question, but that's because they put their perception of God on you. That wasn't your perception of God in the first place, right? Like something like as simple as God is good, right? As long as you know Allah's attributes of being just, of being
exactly,
merciful,
yes.
of being the most wise, you can kind of navigate through these things, and your deen won't be phased because of that.
Especially, yeah, exactly. And so when they go down the route of God is good and pigeonhole God in that kind of way, it's like, as well as breaking down the conception of what you deem to be good, why does God have to
Yeah,
adhere to that? Because we know God is all wise as well, right? All
yeah,
knowing,
yeah,
he's al latif. So in the sense of, in the moment you might think this is bad, but in the long run things happen in subtle ways where it's all coming together.
yeah,
Different aspects of life and different decisions, they all kind of come together for the good, and they may be perceived as bad. So it's like all these conceptions, it's like, I think it's almost foreign to them. It's like,
yeah,
well, what is these kind of ideas and conceptions about God? And I think in that sense, like in saying that though, in those spaces, definitely you'd have to have conviction and a basic level understanding of your own Islamic theology. Because if you go in not knowing much about what Islam has to say, because if you don't, like, I find a lot of, not a lot of Muslims, I don't want to stereotype, but you have Muslims like that. And so their conception of these kind of theological discussions are pretty much
yeah.
based on what they assume it to be. Like they may also say, yeah, God is good. Like obviously we want, like, I guess in the general sense, like, yeah, like
Hmm.
I'm not gonna say everyone's gonna say God is good in that sense, right? Like in an innocent manner. But
Right.
it's like in an argumentative kind of philosophical debate, a different ball game, right? And so if you don't actually understand or know your deen or your Islamic theology, you're going to run into a lot of problems. And you might really, it might shake your faith as well. I honestly think, because I think a lot of the issues, especially in the Muslim community, it's like they assume an argument that is posed to them that seems logical, is the correct or right way. And so they don't actually consider the fact that perhaps their ignorance is actually inhibiting them to understand the
Yeah,
better argument
yeah,
to that question. They've already accepted, like, oh, dang, like I can't answer this. Okay, son probably doesn't have the answers to this. And it's kind of, these assumptions are made, but it's like, if you have that kind of underpinning and conviction in terms of understanding what Islam has to say in these subjects, then you can easily navigate it. It's all, I don't even say it's a piece of cake, honestly. Because because as I said, like a lot of Muslims may not understand the fundamentals and ways
a
of
lot of people, I think they undermine learning their own creed and beliefs in the first place. Like learning aqidah, that's a whole science, right? And people, they think as long as you have la ilaha illallah, and like the
exactly, yeah.
five pillars, and six pillars of iman, you're good, right? But you need to, like, alhamdulillah, me and some of the other guys in the community, we were fortunate enough to have a year-long course with one of our local teachers going over aqidah, right? And that's something that was much needed, especially because I also like took some philosophy courses, and I was just hearing some of this stuff. I'm like, man, this is like really interesting stuff, and I could see how someone that didn't know anything about their creed could get easily fall into stuff like, is there a soul, right? Something like what was that razor? The razor that it's like
Can
the
God
the
lift a big rock so
no,
heavy?
it's the one where it's like the simplest option is usually the right option or something like that, right?
Ah, right, Occam's razor, yeah.
Occam's razor, right? And then they try to apply that to God, of like, God is such a complex thing. Why not just take the simpler route of, you know, can there be a God in the first place, right? Like, I think my philosophy professor explained in the sense of like, let's say the door opens, right? And someone told you that a huge invisible elephant opened that door. Would you believe them?
Yeah.
No, the simpler answer would probably be no, the wind probably blew it, or maybe someone entered and you didn't see them, and they sat down or something like that, right? So they try to apply that to God, and you can see that as like, whoa, that's such an amazing answer. But a lot of these concepts themselves, they're not agreed upon, and also it takes, like I said, it takes preconceptions and perceptions of God before even actually. So something like Occam's razor, they're already assuming that the simplest answer is not that there is God. There can be an
Yeah,
argument to be made that the more complex answer is that there is no designer, right? And yeah, that's a whole debate in and of itself. And yeah, like I can
yeah.
see how a lot of this stuff confuses like Muslims that have no ounce of knowledge in creed or aqidah.
Exactly. And so even, for example, one of my classes, it was one of the weeks was just God and evil. And essentially what happened is one of the questions, and if Muslims talk, like if you've taken basic Aqidah course, they've actually talked about then, but this is from the assumption that if the Muslim didn't take it, the
Yeah,
question that they were asked, or we were asked in the philosophy class we did in that week in regards to God and evil was pretty much, can God lift a rock so heavy? Can God create a rock so heavy it can't lift? And so I guess a Muslim in that situation, it's like, whoa, like
the
what is these
unstoppable
questions? I've
force and
never
the immovable object, right? That's the classic example they always bring up.
exactly. Yeah, and so it's like for me, I'm like those questions aren't really the issue. It's like questions observed in of itself, but so a lot of other Muslims would be like, wait, I don't know, if you didn't have that kind of background in Aqidah or that foundation, it would be like really troubling, like these kind of basic questions, because in that moment, I guess when you encounter that question, it
Yeah,
is like confusing, especially if it's not like an Islamic environment where it's conducive to understanding your Aqidah, right?
yeah,
And even like, for example, they even I had this debate with my tutor, just the idea of God and logic. Is God succumb to logic? Does that mean logic is overpowering him? Or I don't know, if God created logic, why should God pretty much, why can't God exist and not exist at the same time? Things like that. And so from the Islamic conception Aqidah perspective, it's like God does things befitting to his majesty or to his being, right? So like we
yeah.
can easily navigate those kind of
Like the question,
conversation of
the
its own.
question of can he move a stone that's unmovable or something like that, right? Like my teacher described it as like, have you ever seen a square circle? Like, have you ever like a
Exactly.
circle that also has the characteristics of a square? Have you ever seen that? Like, does that even make sense? No, right? So like the question itself doesn't even make sense, right?
Exactly.
These
So
questions don't befit God's
absurd.
characteristics.
Yeah. Question of itself is absurd. Like, why
Yeah,
are you asking absurd questions? Like,
that's an
how
illogical
can you?
question,
Yeah, and it's posed like that, right? And so
right?
it becomes problematic for Muslims that don't have that back understanding or that foundation. So, I guess in those spaces, it was really interesting, kind of navigating this. And man, like if I had one experience to take away from my philosophy subjects, I did. One was like very evident. Like there was this one lady in our classes. She was like Marxist. Like she she was smart, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so in that sense, I had respect for and listened into what she said during our classes, right? And very balanced takes and all that. I'm like, okay, like I can agree with what she's saying, yada yada, in some ways. Obviously, if I disagree, we can have a respectable kind of conversation. And man, they got an evil week. I remember like for some reason she was like, okay, look, I don't want to project the stereotype like men get women get emotional or something, but it was just like you
Yeah,
could see like this whole change in the way she was approaching the normal discussions. Like she's already had 4 weeks of classes and I know the type of person she is, but then for some reason this kind of conversation, it's like I don't know, because she was a atheist, right? So I
yeah,
feel that it's when these kind of conversations happen, it could be I don't know, it's hard to explain. It was really eye-opening in the sense that a lot of people who perhaps deny the existence of God, a lot of it is maybe not saying in her case she is, but it could be leading to like trauma based, or
yeah,
it could be a reaction to how they um or the how religion was put onto them when they were young. Because I just know it was so evident, like the
yeah,
way like she was it was like so much like almost anger. I was like shocked, right? And I'm
yeah.
like, chill, dude. Like, okay, you know what I mean? So, but yeah, so that was like really like eye opening. Just having that, like, I guess I don't know if you consume a lot of content on YouTube, like Speakers Corner and stuff. It's one thing to kind of watch it over the internet, but
Oh
it's
man, when
another
I
thing
was
to
when I was
actually experience.
15, bro, those speakers corners debates, they filled my summers.
Yeah, 100%. And alhamdulillah, like for the better, like looking back, it gave you that izzah for the deen, right?
Yeah, I mean,
That's how it worked for
sometimes,
me.
yeah, that's how it was for me too. Like when you're first getting into deen, it gives you like that strength and like that zeal to like debate anyone you want. But you know, I don't think it's necessary all the time, right?
It's like, even though at that time I wouldn't have understand all the arguments at its
Yeah, of
totality, it's
course.
like
Yeah,
seeing the Muslim at least go neck and neck and toe to
yeah,
toe with this kind of other dude gives you
definitely.
like that feeling, wait, there's something here in Islam. And the way they
Yeah,
kind of bring
like we
philosophical
do have
ideas,
an
it's like we
intellectual
have
background.
something.
Yeah,
Yes, exactly. That's pretty much what I got from Speaker's Coin. It's like we do have something here. And I guess the journey started from there in some ways. It's like able to connect with people, like, because I come from, I don't know like what your background, I don't know if I can mention this, but I was very like a hardcore kind of Salafi background initially
oh
when I got
nice,
into Deen. Yeah. So it was very
classic
black and
story.
white. Yeah. Actually, I'll give you, I'll show you something. I think I got the book here. Actually, here it is. So this book pretty much is, I don't know
Is
if you
that
can
by
see it,
Sheikh Al
prayer.
Albani?
No, it's not. It's by Professor Muhammad Zulfikar.
Okay,
Um, so this is prayer according to the Sunnah. I don't know if you can see the
yeah, I
wording.
can see that. I can see that.
Yeah, so I was very kind of hardcore Salafi, black and white. It makes sense, like, did Rasul Sallallahu and the Sahaba follow madhabs or something? It's like we want to go back to the Quran and Sunnah, this and that kind of
Yeah,
arguments, and it's appealing, right? Like I have a lot of respect for Zakir Naik because shaped the discourse. Ahmed did that as well, but I
yeah,
guess when you see those figures on YouTube, it's like naturally you think, hey, these guys are Salafi as well, so I'm just going to become Salafi. It's kind of that
yeah,
kind of
yeah,
mentality, and there's nothing wrong with it. Like I think this is actually tied into the temperaments. I think a lot of, not to say people can go into the historicity of how the Salafism movement emerged, but in saying that, if I'm talking about the current context of Salafism in of itself today, obviously
yeah.
there's the extremist kind of strands and all that, but
I think
if
it's really
someone
diverse now. Like that whole field
yeah,
is really diverse now.
exactly. And so for me, I think it's almost Allah, perhaps, wisdom. I don't know, like just a thought that I'm just gonna throw out. But because of the temperaments of people, the way, for example, the choleric temperaments wants to
A
see
lot of
everything kind of
cholerics are
to the point.
Salafi.
Yeah,
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 a lot of clerics
100%,
are
right?
Salafi. That's what I've also picked up. I'm like, you can kind of see like who aligns to what ideology and like what speakers based on their temperaments or like how, they kind of um professor temperaments, right? So like a cleric who's very like fiery, they want to defend the deen, they want to just be very rigid and strict on themselves, which is amazing. They'll tend to align with the Salafi
Yeah.
movement a bit more.
And so even in that sense, it's like wisdom for, we may not see it and it may not
Of
be
course,
apparent, but
yeah,
perhaps that's the wisdom, because like at the end of the day, Islam is about, there's that diversity in Islam
yeah.
anyway, right? And so it's like pretty much facilitating Islam for people of that kind of temperament and personality trait and that background. Not to say that you don't find clerics in Sufi circles as well, like you do, but in general, I guess the kind of ones that are a bit more outward and passionate, a lot of it does,
Yeah.
like I feel, the Salafi movement does depict that kind of mentality at
So
times.
the clerics in the Sufi circles are pretty interesting. So I remember, I think either you or maybe like someone else on your podcast mentioned it, where the ideal goal of recognize your temperaments is to balance it out, right? You shouldn't be one extreme of the temperament, right?
Yeah,
So what I found is some of the clerics in the Sufi circles, they speak one way, and then you'll see them in a dhikr circle, being at the most peace that you'll ever find them, being very to themselves. If you ever go on itikaf or something, you might see them in their corner like doing tahajjud like super late at night without anyone seeing them, right?
yeah,
Which is what I've
subhanallah.
which is what I've kind of seen, and I've kind of realized that choosing that way of such a peaceful, serene way of life, just keeping to themselves, being calm, it might be their way of well, and maybe it's not a conscious choice, but maybe they gravitated towards it because they needed that peace and that that calmness and that quietness to really balance out their natural, fiery instincts and
Yeah,
fiery
like
personality.
I think even with cleric temperaments in Sufi circles, you'll see a lot of them very diligent with different acts of worship,
Yeah.
ibadah, in the sense of, yeah, as you mentioned, like tahajjud and stuff. I know like clerics like that, mashallah. It's like they're on task, super diligent, just going at it. It's like, if they have something or a goal to accomplish, which is to, do as many Islamic acts as possible,
For sure.
they'll get it done. They'll do different things. And it's really, mashallah, it's amazing that it's that kind of mindset that propels them to do a lot of acts of worship. But I guess different, like, I guess in the flip side of the coin is that, for example, like the phlegmatic water temperament, they're more about the experience or the
Yeah.
vibe as well. And so they may perceive worship. And it's really fascinating. We can talk about how Islam is universal.
Yeah.
You'll have different temperaments perceive the same acts of worship differently and with different experiences. You get what I mean? So it's
Yeah.
facilitating, accommodating in all fronts. So like, it's for the phlegmatic or temperament, for example, they're all about the vibe and experience. So because they're the slow to react, and perhaps, in order for them to really have that experience in salah, and that may drive them to do more worship. Not to say it's the only thing, obviously we do it for the sake of Allah, but it's kind of facilitating why they want to do extra worship. Is that experience that they have, the vibe that they have when they're
Yeah.
praying, or that vibe that they have in dhikr circles and being with mates and worshiping
Yeah.
Allah in that sense.
Yeah.
It's like they feel that kind of energy, and they want to do that because of that. And so it's like really fascinating how Islam is very universal in those kind of levels, if you kind of
Yeah.
put it under that lens as well.
For sure. I think naturally I'm a phlegmatic, but I've kind of because of like how I've been since high school, been more social and whatnot. Like I took a couple tests and it was always like very close to the sanguine and the phlegmatic portions for me, but I was always like a bit more phlegmatic. So I think naturally I've always been like a bit more reserved to myself. So like exactly what you said, like the feeling part of it, I've always noticed this where like I always kind of gravitate to the feeling of, Salah, and like when I don't feel, obviously you still do it, right? You don't worship the feeling, you worship Allah.
Yeah, of course.
But the feeling really
But
helps,
it just
like just getting in that
facilitates a
vibe.
little bit. It just
Yeah,
facilitates a little
of
more,
course.
And it's not to shun it. It's to be like, look, at the end of the day, like phlegmatics are very people based, they're not principle based like melancholics and cholerics are.
Yeah,
So like, for example, with melancholics, like they may have all these kind of to-do lists, to things to do, and tomorrow they'll all get it done, and they have this kind of rigid
yeah,
way of seeing it and getting it all done, task-based oriented. And so it's like phlegmatics aren't on that kind of same ballpark, but in the same sense, it's like, what other sort of skills and sort of natural abilities that we do have can we harness and use in order to get those things done? And experience is a big factor, and a vibe is a big factor in facilitating that as well. So it's always something to consider. But going back to the cleric point, the reason I showed the book earlier, so this book, is because like
right.
this one pretty much got me out of my Salafi phase, because like this is a very Salafi book in terms of how to pray.
Uh-huh.
And when I read it, it was like, if you look at pretty much the hadiths that they quote, there's no commentary to it. It's just translation Arabic, right?
Right.
And so that was a bit of I'm just like, wait, what's going on here? This is a bit weird. Like, it seems very like, for example, like we observe in Islam, there's different schools of, different madhabs that pray a bit differently. That we all pray like the same thing, but just little things that
Yeah,
there's differences in. So it's like, how can this book kind of claim to be like as if it's like the final or the correct way of
for sure.
praying, where when we have this kind of fluidity in some ways, right? So that was kind of eye opener. So it kind of sent me on this journey, and then with Speakers Corner, all that kind of thing, that really opened up to that kind of intellectual, like proper intellectual side of Islam. And that's when you get into like works of Ghazali, and that really like takes you on a different kind of path in of itself. And you tie that with Sufism, and you're just like, wow, subhanallah. Like, so that's kind of my trajectory within Islam as well, in a nutshell.
Gotcha, bro. That sounds amazing. Um, there's a lot to unpack there, but I do kind of want to go back to your university life, because I'm a bit curious with some of that. You mentioned that you got involved with the MSA there. So it is called MSAs in Australia, right? Not ISOCs like in the UK.
Oh, there's a funny story I have to tell you about.
Okay, yeah,
So
go for it.
at my university, I don't know how many people in my locality will appreciate me saying this story, but anyways, I'll say it
Go
anyway.
for it.
So there was always an ISOC at university for
Right.
almost like 30-40 years or something like crazy, and it's always been the same person at the head of it. And what happened was a lot of the youngsters would come in and do a lot of works for that particular ISOC and
Yeah.
run events and volunteer, etc. But then they always felt that a lot of things that they felt that community needed to do or have discussions about or invite certain speakers in and discuss and connect with the youth over that
Yeah.
kind of specific ISOC didn't cater to that.
Hmm.
And so straight like I don't know, Islamically, someone would be like, oh, you can't have two caliphs in the Ummah or something. So we had like basically two different we had one ISOC and one MSA as a result of that
Oh
situation. So they opened
no.
up a different MSA and everyone goes to that MSA basically. Like now, if you from our context of if you live like locally and are into kind of proper discussions and discourse and having that kind of philosophical debates
Yeah.
and all that, the MSA organizes pretty much all those kind of events and stuff. ISOC don't really, they do invite some speakers here and there, but they aren't involved in the way that you'll see MSA should be. And so
Okay.
yeah, we have pretty much two different Islamic one ISOC and one MSA on campus. But yeah, like most of us we call it MSAs here pretty much.
Okay, yeah, that's dope. So over here, it's all just MSAs. In New York, it's a bit interesting because just the amount of colleges and universities that there are. There's like a bunch of different MSAs, and alhamdulillah, I think in the past couple of years, especially like with COVID and stuff, like a lot of us, have networked with each other. We all know each other. Alhamdulillah, like I was on my MSA board for the past couple of years. Past year, I was president with an all-female board. That was an experience. That was an experience, but
Would you say like people are very strict about the sort of because that's like one of the interesting things you have to navigate is like if people are too like I wouldn't say Salafis is the right term, but it's like
yeah.
in terms of say gender segregation, it's like is it full like
In my
everyone's like
opinion, I think we tried to make it a bit more strict because you need a balance, right? Like there's one way where like there's at events there's everyone just sitting next to each other, and there's like a scholar speaking, and then it's like kind of weird, and it's like you do kind of sometimes you do want that barrier. Obviously you don't put like a curtain up, but you're like, hey guys, like sit on this side, sisters sit on that side. um and it was really funny. There's like there was a friend of mine. He actually got me into become more involved in MSA. He was the president right before me, and then the year going in, he was in a different program. He was in the pharmacy program, which is 6 years, and I'm in the nursing program, which is 4 years. I still have a year left of that, but he was going into his fifth year, and I was going to my third year. And he was pretty much like, Shaquille, I'm done with them. Say, what do you have to take over? I'm like, bro, what the heck? What are you talking about? So, and then like, I was pretty much the only ballot for president. So I was like, this is terrible. I don't want, like, this is so bad. Um, because me personally, I don't like to, be too authoritative. I kind of hesitate in like telling people what to do, and like, kind of controlling the room a bit, and stuff like that. Especially like in some of those in-person events when he was president. Some of his friends, they would kind of just because they're boys, right? So they're kind of just like, yeah, don't I'll move my seat, but then they'll still sit with their like majority female friend group, and it's like, oh, this looks kind of bad. Like you
yeah,
don't want to
yeah,
force them, right? But yeah, so like to your question, is it strict gender segregation? I mean, we try to do the best we can according to like what some of our teachers have told us, but in that kind of setting, it's a bit weird. And then that whole free mixing thing is a debate in and of itself. It gets kind of tricky, right? I don't
yeah.
know what
When
the
especially when
experience
you've
has been
got
for you.
no, it's a good sort of topic to dissect because it's like I think firstly because there's diversity of opinion as well. I know, like for
Yeah,
example, to my knowledge, the Maliki opinion is a bit more lenient in comparison to others,
from
and
from what I've heard too, but I'm really not sure. Like I'm straight Hanafi, so I try to try
yeah,
to try to go by the book on that one.
yeah. Hanafis aren't even meant to say salams to the female. Like it's pretty strict on that sense as well. So that's what I
Yeah.
mean. Like the point, like this is a whole conversation of itself. It's because like it's something to factor in is like the time and place. So for example, if you
Of course.
don't give salams to a sister now, right, it just looks so bad. It
It's
looks
so
like,
rude.
oh,
Yeah, it's
it's
very rude.
so rude, right? So it's like,
Yeah.
should I, like, I know like strict Hanafis will be, kind of really, disappointed in me, but it's like you can't, it's really hard. And especially like if you're in the community space, and especially if you're a leader in whatever organization you're in, if you go and implement those, it's going to be really, like, you can pull it off depending on, this is in the context of perhaps the sisters understand it, they understand those rules, it's like you can work on that level. But
Yeah.
in reality, people are from all different spectrums of life,
Yeah.
right? And people grew up, very strict on Islam in the household. Some people didn't. Some people just started to find out Islam. So it's like there's so many dynamics to consider. And in saying that, it's like it becomes difficult to kind of manage all of it. So for me, it's like, in terms of gender segregation, I definitely wouldn't encourage people to, like, me growing up Bengali, and I probably want to hear your thoughts about this as well. But like,
Hmm.
because we have like, big Bengali community here in Sydney as well, and what happens is there's a lot of, they call it dawats, hang out, a lot of different families come together
Yeah.
and chill. And so naturally, I've always like had female friends, like just growing
Hmm.
up, and
Right.
just chatting and hanging out and stuff. And so it was always natural for me. So it's really interesting. So like you have those kind of people that always grew up on Deen and Islam, very, intensely growing up, and their parents didn't let them talk to any girls or anything, which is like fine, like, mashallah. At the same time, it's like when they get to, like, when they're 22 or 23 years of age and they have to interact with the real
Yeah.
world, it's like they can't
Yeah.
even hold a convo. It's like,
Yeah.
dude, like, what's going on, right? So like, so for me, it's like I never had that issue. And so, however, in that sense, growing up and being in Islamic spaces, it's like obviously you need to maintain, you can't be like super close with someone to that, degree, especially like with a female. I think it's like, I don't encourage it anyway. It's like bad news in some, like, if you hang out with a woman, a girl or
Hmm.
lady for a prolonged period of time, you'll get feelings naturally, I think, as a guy,
Yeah.
like over a long period of time.
Yeah.
Even if you don't have an attraction to them when you first, sort of met them. So it's like, I think from that perspective, it's like you have to, I think the boundaries is like, yeah, you can say salams and work in a kind of, organizational environment. But in terms of actually hanging out and, like you have those
Yeah.
friend circles, like see it obviously a lot in university where guys
Hmm.
and girls come together, hang out and laughing and
Yeah.
joking. If it gets to that point, I don't think I think it's a bad thing
So
to
yeah, there's
get
that's a
into
big
that kind of
reason why.
situation.
That's a big reason why there's like I don't know if it's like the same case for Australia, but in New York there's a huge disconnect from like maybe a bit more of the religious circle. They're more with masjid youth groups, and alhamdulillah, I've been blessed enough to have a great community in my neighborhood, and we're all very close, and we do weekly halakas and monthly events and whatnot. And there's a huge disconnect from people in that circle, and then like people who try to find Dean in university, and they gravitate more towards the MSA. And the one of the main things that they always bring up is like, dude, like you see guys go to like pick up chicks in the MSA, like, are you serious? Like, and that's that can be like an exaggeration, right? But I'm like,
Yeah, yeah,
bro, come on, like they're raised in a different space, like cut them some slack. And you try to, you kind of want to have like a balanced take on it. Like, obviously it's not right, but like where else will they find Dean? And as long as, in my opinion, as long as like they're not doing it in the MSA space of like, at an event, or like, in the prayer room, right?
yeah.
Which can
I
be
think
ridiculous, but
Yeah, I think even in that situation, if it's like the sisters are feeling uncomfortable, and as a guy,
yeah,
that this guy is doing that or something, I think it's a responsibility for
of
guys to
course,
just
of course, yeah,
put, check that guy and be like, what are you doing, bro? Like, it's not, appropriate, etc. And it's interesting because you do have that kind of dynamic as well, right? Like, it's in MSAs here, it's not as overt. Like, you don't have that perception like, oh, guys are just coming in to pick up girls or something, right? Like, it doesn't exist like on an overt level here, but it might
yeah,
happen, like, I guess, um behind the scenes, in the sense of, they kind of put that front, but then, they're trying to DM girls in them or something.
yeah,
But in the, overt sense, it doesn't, that kind of sentiment doesn't exist. And I think a lot of, like, it's really interesting, like a lot of phlegmatic and melancholics, or even phlegmatic melons or melon flags, I find that a lot of subcontinental sort of background folks are of that kind of temperament, from
Mhm.
experiences that I had in Sydney. So it's like they aren't even like courageous to go and DM people anyway. So it's like
Yeah.
it makes it a bit easier. Like they're a bit like scared to do things like that.
Yeah.
So there's that, you know, so you don't have to worry
I
about
mean, yeah,
that.
it
You
was
know?
more of an exaggeration, but they're kind of referring to like, these guys, bro, they're hanging out with like six sisters, like right outside the musalla area. Like, are you
Oh,
serious?
really?
Like,
Okay,
they're kind of
yeah,
referring to that, but I'm sure like DMs
yeah.
might be going on behind the scenes. I have no clue.
Yeah.
Uh,
Subhanallah. But yeah, like I think even like with gender segregation, all that, it's hard because like I found, I don't know if you're like the circles you're in, but here in
mm,
Sydney, like we have like different kind of circles. There's a maybe more lax crew in the sense of, you know, a bit more balance taken Deen, and there's the bit more hardcore group where, you know, they're strict onto Deen and make sure they follow even like everything to gender segregation to the T and all that, which is
yeah,
admirable. But even in those circles, like the very traditional circles that go, I wouldn't say hardcore is the right word. Like they're following Islam, I guess, and how they've studied it. So it's like that's how they're going to act by it. Like, mashallah, it's very admirable. But in doing that, sometimes people from those certain circles may look down at organizations that are, for example, a bit more lax on the, you know, gender
yeah,
segregation thing, and it becomes detrimental because, like, I think there's a, I don't want to maybe mention names, but like there's an organization here, in Sydney, they do mashallah great works, but a lot of very traditional brothers that have studied Deen, like, not to say they haven't, like people in that organization haven't, they actually have. And it's really interesting, even some of them got like approval, the tick of approval from like big scholars from
hmm
overseas to do this, because they find that those sort of circles that, like, obviously guys and girls pretty much are in different ends of the room, but
right.
it's like there's no barricade, so it's like a
There's no
big issue.
okay, gotcha.
Yeah, there's a big like discussion with a lot of like very traditional circles, like, you know,
Yeah,
astaghfirullah, this and that. But even in that context, man, like as we were discussing earlier, where sometimes women have difficulties having proper access to sheikhs, right? That's the
yeah,
sort of society we live in, unfortunately, right? And so these kind of spaces are perfect for them to able to ask the right questions and really experience what the brothers experience in terms of learning as well.
hmm
And I think that's why it's important to reconsider kind of ideas of, you know, for example, being too harsh or hard in how, you know, gender segregation is done. So I think it just needs to be a bit more of a balanced take,
yeah.
how
I
we
mean,
go
as long
about
as there's like scholarly backing to what you're doing, right? So what you're saying about, there's no barricade, that's a debated issue in of itself, right? Like some people say there was no parda in the Prophet's mosque. Some people say that, and I think the more cautious take, maybe have a curtain. And some sisters actually do want the curtain, right? Like they do want that privacy, but it's like more of like, what does the audience want, and is there
it.
scholarly
Yeah,
backing for it? Which it seems like there is.
yeah,
The organization you're talking about.
yeah, for sure. Yeah,
Yeah, it's a weird thing to navigate, man, especially in the MSA. Like, a lot of the events we had the past year, I wouldn't completely like, and these are stuff I plan to. I wouldn't completely say like some of the stuff we had were, things that I would most want out of an MSA event, or like, some stuff like, philosophical debates, or like, things more a bit more dini oriented, like knowledge based, learning aqidah, fiqh, and some stuff about like, even stories about the prophets, or stuff like that. Like these stuff I'm a bit more gravitated towards too. But I can see how in the crowd and the MSA body that I was a part of, uh, these guys would not have gone to those types of events, right? So we had more stuff regarding to like mental health, right? We had more halakha based stuff where people could come in and we have conversations about different stuff that they're, concerned about. We had like, we had like an event on different forms of love in Islam. So like, there was like a marriage counselor, and then there was like also an imam. I always made sure to push that, like, we need to have at least like one scholar for like, so like we'd have like a professional in that regard, and we'd also have like an imam, and then they'd have like a panel event. Like I always wanted some kind of spiritual aspect at least. But I don't regret these events. I do think these events were necessary, and they need to be had. um and alhamdulillah, like I think we're like my MSA especially, I think our our knowledge, or maybe that's not the right word, but like our gravitation towards some of these more quote unquote dini aspects, or like just straight up Islam aspects. I think it's getting higher. So like maybe like next year or something when the new board comes in, they can have some of this stuff in like actual classes and like some of the philosophy type stuff that you were talking about. But it comes in steps, right? Like I think a lot of people like they just want it to happen like that, and they completely throw away the idea of even just like an event where people come in and they come in with like their own questions, and they just want to have a conversation and get their gripes about whatever they have. They just want to talk about it, right? I think people like disregard stuff like that, and they just want like, yo, just talk about like, the prophets and like the Quran and Sunnah, and just stick to this, right? And it's I don't know, it's like one extreme or the other a lot of the time. What's your experience been like in Sydney MSA?
Um, in terms of experience, like we have had different events and different I think it's interesting. I think our context in specifically the NMS I was part of is that we did tend to do a lot more of the philosophical type debates,
Gotcha.
and that in of itself, I think if you do too much of that, and not to say like we didn't do other events, like we had story of Sierra, we
Yeah.
had all that sort of other stuff. We had get-togethers in terms of like playing futsal and football,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
we did
Yeah.
different things. But I guess in terms of like big debates and all that, it did tend, I would say, it did tend towards a bit more like the big events. With the big speakers that came in and stuff, it did go towards a more philosophical kind of route. And I think it did, looking back, it's very good. But at the same time, it's like you're alienating a lot of the community as well. I
Yeah.
think a lot of like, for example, sisters or even like certain guys, it's like they're not even their interest, right? And so it's like, why can I be, bothered to go
Yeah.
to that? And so it becomes tricky to navigate that space as well. And it's like you don't want to force them into it either, because yeah, sure, like we might find it beneficial in some ways, and I think it's important in this day and age. We live in that age of confusion where people should have the skill set and ideas to navigate and have those tools to navigate today's society, and able to
For sure.
understand society and its underpinnings and the ideas that come with it, right?
Hmm.
And I think that's why with the different areas of study, that's helped me to understand how people perceive things, and learning about different thinkers as well, and how society has shaped the way people think to a certain degree. And so how secularism and the way we perceive the world is a bit more prevalent in some sense. But it's important to have that in the back of your mind, like as a in the back of your pocket. It doesn't have to be in a from a very deep study. It can just be a
For
very
sure.
kind of surface level study. But in saying that, a lot of people don't have that interest, so it becomes difficult to force it. So it's really important. Yeah, like it's really good that to hear from you guys. What you mentioned is that you had the mental health stuff and all those kind of topics, because those are also very important, and includes a lot of, and mental health is a big
Yeah.
discussion point
Yeah.
in our
Definitely.
community as well. And I think with the four temperaments, it helps a lot. Like it clears up a lot
It
of that
really
kind of
does. I
confusion.
I think once like with that, especially the biggest thing that I got out of Four Temperance, it really validates some of the stuff that you've kind of seen as like weaknesses in yourself. You're like, okay, so this is like why I do that, and like it's not. I kind of just need to balance it with that, and as long as you're like working on that, then you shouldn't really see it as like a flaw within yourself. It's more just like your how your nature is, right. You can't really see it as
Yeah,
like I was I'm a mistake for thinking this way. It's just like you are how you are.
exactly. And so even in that conversation, people don't realize, like using the temperaments framework, that you can even use your own element to display your sort of, or try to display your opposite. So for example, you mentioned like phlegmatic or the water temperament before. For example, because one issue that they may have in terms of going by life is having that courage to do things
Hmm.
when the time requires you to be courageous. It becomes a bit difficult, whereas like the fire temperament will find courage a lot more easier to come by. So from the water temperament phlegmatic perspective, because naturally one is the phlegmatic water temperament is slow to react and cool, calm, collected, and maybe lack that courage at times, they can use their element to display courage. So for example, because since they're more people pleasing, they have they're more of people pleasers. So since
Mm.
they're emotionally intelligent, they will make sure everyone around them is happy, and they always mediate situations between people who have, disputes or arguments as well. Naturally, the phlegmatic will tend to mediate, like, and bring them together. And so in that, so since knowing about the temperaments, it's like, okay, now since I know that I'm a phlegmatic and I have all these things, it's like, how can I display courage using those tools? So it's like, okay, one of the ways is, for example, because you'll have the people pleasing aspect side, you make sure that you create environments where you don't want to let someone down. And because you
Yeah.
don't want to let someone down, you're more likely to be courageous, because you do that thing like, I don't know, for example, I won't be your friend if you don't go up to that, I don't know, scholar and ask him to do an event at a MSA. I don't know, just made that up, right? And I don't know, like a Yasakadi or something's like down the road, and he's there, and you just, you freeze up a little. You just like,
Right.
it's natural for the phlegmatic, right? But then if you create the environment with people around them, and it's like the way they talk to you, it's like you're letting them down. If you don't, you're just like more likely to go do it anyway. So it's like that.
Right.
So it's like using your element to kind of try to display your opposite as well. So it's really fascinating how deep like the science can go in that sense as well.
Gotcha. So I have a few questions now. Because that speaker question really was interesting. It kind of showed me how um big personalities can also be a form of courage, right? Like going up to them and just speaking to them can be pretty intimidating to a lot of people. So someone like me or someone like yourself, phlegmatics, right? Have you ever felt that intimidation when you were like asking someone on for a podcast, or have you ever been intimidated by like a huge personality that you had to talk to for like an event or like something else you were doing?
Um, since a lot of them I do reach out through email and stuff, so it's not like you
Right.
have to face that. But if you're talking about in the situations I had to do it in person,
Yeah.
I think naturally, yeah, like the first thing with the phlegmatic, it's like you have these kind of anxious thoughts. It's like, what if they say no? What if I don't know, I look like an idiot asking them, or something like that? So it's
Right.
like naturally it becomes difficult hurdles. But I would say no, because I think in terms of nurture aspect, I've been, alhamdulillah, learned to, not from the courage perspective, but just talking to people and building relationships with people. I think it's a bit easier when you have that side of you. It's like you find those kind of acts a lot easier in that sense. But it also helps if, for example, like, not to be like, hopefully it doesn't come across as egotistical, but people know about Boys in the Cave and people want to be on
Of
our show.
course. Yeah.
So it's like it helps, like you're coming from
Definitely.
a position of strength. So it's like an honor for them to come. So if you, I have that in mind, I guess, like it's like,
Right.
it's more of a honor, or it's more of a privilege for them to come on, and the fact
Like
I'm
it's
even
a
asking
two-way
them,
street, right? Like you're getting them as a guest, but they're also getting their persona out there, and they're being a bit more public because they have a platform to speak on.
Yeah, and it's actually a good point you touched on this, because with the cleric or the fire temperament, the phlegmatic may struggle with courage.
Right.
The other thing is, from the cleric or the fire temperament perspective, like passion's a big thing. It's like the
Mhm.
very easily can get passionate, and that's why you see like a lot of the big speakers, they're such good speakers because they're so passionate on stage and show that
Right.
cleric side. And so sometimes if you're passionate off your, like, from the water phlegmatic temperament perspective, if you're passionate about your podcast, or passionate about what you do in life, it just makes it a lot easier. It's like suddenly things open up for you, and you're more
Yeah,
dedicated or determined to get that stuff done. So if you're passionate about your sort of thing that you do, or the project that you do, it just helps a lot more. It makes it a lot easier to
for
sort of do
sure.
things and ask people.
Yeah, that's what I found as well. I do kind of relate to your point of like, going up to the people and, straight up asking them. It's never been an issue for me. It was always in the beginning, especially, it was more of like, what is, like, I know they'll say no, right? Like I should probably wait a bit more before asking such a big speaker, right? Maybe rack a bit more episodes. And that's kind of what I've been doing so far. Because I'm like, unlike Boys in the Cave, you guys have been established for quite a bit now, but I'm sure like even in the beginning you might have felt this way too, or like, what do I have to offer them at this stage, right? Like like I don't think I can get that guest yet because I'm not established. Let me like rack up those episodes, which I think has been working for me so far.
Yeah,
But yeah, like, wait 1 second.
yeah, no worries.
So I think it's been working for me so far. And like the intimidation part, I think just like if as long as you keep like talking to people, like for one thing, you don't really get phased when people ghost you. You don't really get phased when people say no, because people generally don't say no. They're usually gonna say, hey, sorry, like this isn't fitting into my schedule. And then they might say, can you hit me up in like a couple months or two, right? Like people
Yeah, yeah.
generally I've found they don't really say no. They either ghost you because they haven't seen it. I don't think people intentionally don't see it, right? Also, I funny story with you actually. I hit you up on Twitter,
Yeah, that's
and then
interesting. Yeah, you're telling
Facebook,
me.
and
I
then
think I think I saw a tweet on Twitter. I remember you. I think you tweeted something, and then yeah, it's really because some people are just like when you have like messages like that, you just kind
yeah,
of forget or you kind of lose track. And so like yeah, I somehow you got hold of my number, so then you messaged me because
which
I actually
I
use
was
my
really
WhatsApp a lot more, so I see it. But
alhamdulillah for
yeah,
that.
now mashallah, I appreciate like the persistence from your end, like mashallah, like that was admirable. I was actually going to mention that before we started the episode, but it's good that you brought that up, like
Yeah,
appreciate that kind of persistence because like even for me sometimes it's like I already reached out to them on I don't know Instagram or Facebook or whatever, it's like they still haven't responded back, so it's
yeah.
like kind of can't be bothered. But you actually I think you did all my channels, was it like I think
So
Twitter
I
you
did
might have.
Twitter and then I did Facebook because I had you on Facebook, and then I wasn't phased by any of this. I'm like, okay, he's probably like busy, whatever, right? Um, and then a friend of mine, he was in a mutual group chat with you. I think he was in like a Mad Mamluks group chat, right? There's like a bunch of people, like
Okay.
a bunch of their guests in that same group chat, and he, I think he knew them through Twitter, so he was also added to that group chat, and then I think he like asked around for your number because I was he told me about it and I was like, wait, so do you have Tanzim's number? Because I've been trying to reach him, and it was like, oh, let me check for you, and then he got it for me. I was like, yo, this is incredible. So
No, mashallah, no,
I was
that's
worried though. I was worried like would he like be offended that I asked for his number without
luckily I'm not
asking
the
him first
temperament to
or
be offended, so it's all
right?
right.
Okay, gotcha.
Alhamdulillah. But yeah, nah, like even in that sense, it's like yeah, like for me, from a perspective of Boys in the Cave and why I started it, it's just because sometimes it's really interesting when we study people that have excelled in the professions. One thing you've seen you might observe is for
Yeah,
I don't know, random example comes to mind is like Kanye West, right?
yeah,
He's just so you can just see the kind of determination and the way he thinks that he's the best, he's the greatest or whatever. It's just the way he talks about it, it's just so much conviction. It's like he embodies it and believes it to
yeah,
that extent. And you see that recurring thing with a lot of people that are doing well in life in whatever professions they are. They're just like so certain and so have that conviction that they're like the best thing in this. And that actually helps a lot with confidence in the sense that if you think, okay, obviously from the Sufi kind of perspective, it's not ideal. I don't recommend you to think
yeah.
you're better than everyone, all that.
Of course,
But
of
I'm just
course.
thinking from a perspective of, sort of doing well and being passionate about what you sort of want to do in life. It's like if you have that conviction that you're better than everyone around you regarding this, most of the time, like it will allow you to do a lot better than just thinking, oh wait, they're all
Of
better
course.
than me,
Yeah.
and because that kind of mental hurdle is a big thing,
Yeah.
right?
I
And
think
so for me, I
just taking yourself seriously.
yeah, yeah, exactly. And so for me, it's like not to say that I exercise that, but from the perspective of doing Boys in the Cave, I just have that firm conviction is that the sort of conversations we have, it's not being like number one, it's not being done within the community
Yeah.
as much, and secondly, it's like I can see it feeling a void in the community as well. And add to that, like the alhamdulillah, the sort of guests that we've been able to have, it makes it a lot easier to be like, okay, I'm actually providing something for the community that I think other people aren't. And so I have that conviction when I, ask certain guests to come on and stuff
Hmm.
like that. It's because like I see a hypothetical sort of example. You'll see, I don't know, a Yasser Qadi or Omar Suleiman, like for example, they might
Yeah.
I have we haven't had either on, but just as an example,
Right.
they the way sometimes they may do interviews with different, not just podcasts, but just the way they do
Yeah.
lectures, it's very like kind of surface level, can't really get into the crux of discussions, etc.
Yeah.
And so for me, it's like I have that conviction, like, oh, if they were to come to on our show, would be unpacking something that they probably wouldn't be doing or unpacking in normal kind of other conversations that they have. So it's like when you have that kind of conviction, it's like it makes it a lot easier. It's like you're actually doing them a service. It's like they are actually having the opportunity to unpack these discussions in a much more like, because I think we're not like some hardcore Salafis,
Right. Of
condemning
course.
people against using philosophy or something,
Of course.
like we're pretty like open to different ideas, obviously within the spectrum of Ahl Sunnah and all that, but the
Gotcha.
same instance, it's like we're trying to unpack discussions that probably aren't had in the community. So it's like when you have that conviction, it makes it a lot easier,
For
for
sure,
people
bro.
to be wanting to jump on our show and stuff like that.
For sure. Sorry. I just got a call like twice already. I have to pick it up. I'll
Okay.
be back in like a
Yeah, no
minute.
worries.
Like I'll just pick it up, see what they want, and I'll be right back. Sorry.
Uh,
Yeah, sure. So
yeah,
you
maybe
can say
say
your
your
story.
story.
Yeah.
Just
Oh,
maybe mention your. So yeah, we're talking about your accident.
yeah, gotcha. So I I had to pause the recording because I got a call. Pretty much what happened was my car is stuck in a garage. It had to stay overnight. Because I got into an accident yesterday and the towing truck they came, it was like on the highway. So they had to take it to a garage and it stayed overnight. Like alhamdulillah, like both me and the other driver, like neither of us were injured. Um, but both of our cars got towed and it's had to stay over at a garage. So that call was pretty much just like my uncle telling me like when we're gonna go to like pick up the car today. And I believe you had an interesting story to share
Yeah.
on your end.
So with this happened a few months. Actually, it happened some time ago, maybe like 5 6 months ago or something.
Right.
Where like I bought a car, and then literally a month later, like, and this was like
Sorry.
during the COVID.
You're like cutting off a bit.
Sorry, can you hear me now?
Okay, yeah, no, now you're good. Now you're good. Now you're clear.
Okay. Yeah. So essentially, what happened was like
Actually,
bought a
no,
new car.
I don't know what's happening.
Wait, give me a sec. Maybe.
You're good again, but yeah, you're fine now.
Can you hear me all right? Is this better?
No, like 2 seconds ago, it was fine.
Okay, well, I'll try again. Is it right now?
It's like a bit roboty. I'm not sure exactly.
Hear me all right now?
Yeah, yeah, you're good. You're good.
Okay. Just let me know if there's any issues. But yeah,
Gotcha.
so essentially I, I bought a new car, and then literally a month later, so even before that, so before the car accident happened, like I was trying to deeply study the temperaments and reading different books about it and all that.
Uh-huh.
And it's interesting because it's like when you're studying the temperaments, like you can kind of take it two ways. Like if someone's very skeptical of the science already, because it seems like
Right.
silly, or water, fire, what the heck, why would people be like
Like
that or
Avatar.
whatever, right? Yeah, yeah. What's this silly nonsense thing?
Yeah,
Anyway, so it's like if you have that skeptical mind, it limits you to really understand and take in, because it's like a world in of itself. It's like a lens you put on, and then
for
you can
sure.
see
Yeah.
things a bit differently.
Yeah.
And so for me, like I already like accepted the science, but then some things it's like you're reading and you're like, this doesn't sound like me. Not I didn't have that many times. It happened like twice, I think. One of them was like pretty much that if something bad happens, you're
Hmm.
pretty calm and collected in those moments. And this was in one of the books. I'm like, I don't think so. Like,
Yeah, I don't know
I
about
don't
that
know.
one.
Yeah, but then that's really interesting because like when I got into a car accident,
Uh-huh.
what I learned from that is like I was super calm. Like I was just like I had people around me and stuff. And so what happened was like I was going straight on the left
Uh-huh.
lane. In America, it's a bit different. You're all traveling on the right side of the road, right?
No, it's still the left lane. Like the left
Oh, is it
lane is
left lane?
like, yeah, the left lane is pretty much like, um, yeah, it's like when you're trying to go like at a good speed, you're not really like merging and you're not going on an exit. So the left lane is like you're going fast, like everyone's going fast.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so like for me, I was like on the left lane of the traffic light, going straight, and then someone from the
Uh-huh.
right lane is turning into the lane, and he just crashed into me. I'm like, this guy's an
Oh
idiot. But
man.
anyways,
Okay.
he smashed into the car. But then I got out, and there was like people there. I could see like those other people, like if you see other temperaments, they freak out in that situation. They're like the
Right.
energy is like bustling and hustling and panicking and mode. And I was just
Yeah.
like, okay, because the water temperament stuff is very slow to react and stuff, and so
Gotcha.
naturally, calm and collected. It's like, the only thing I was thinking is like, oh man, like just bought a car and now it's like wrecked. But I wasn't like freaking out or
Okay.
anything.
Okay.
So that was really interesting. So I learned that like it's really fascinating. Like like basically what I'm trying to say is like the science temperament was correct already in my analysis. I
Gotcha.
was just the one that perceived myself wrong. And it's really fascinating. That journey of knowing yourself is like really deep. It's like you're knowing yourself to those kind of depths in terms of how you'd react in certain situations
Uh-huh.
and your state or your energy in certain situations. And like for example, so I play a lot of cricket, and it's like even in that situation, sometimes if it's like cold weather, and naturally what happens if I don't know if you like a water temperament, you're already on the water, like the cold spectrum, so you're
Yeah.
more stiff and you're less energetic and less fiery. And so you have to make sure, for example, you have to get the body warmed up, you got to do sprints and get into that frame of
Gotcha.
quick.
Okay.
I think so. It's like that, even things like that, it's like you learn using the temperaments. So it's a really
Mm.
fascinating subject, and it's really deep as well in of itself.
Okay. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Like
Especially
when you had that
the
accident,
cold
were
weather
you
part.
like
Yeah.
freaking out or something? You were just like,
It took
man,
me a
like
while to like accept it,
process it.
process it. Yeah. So like, um, after the accident, like I was kind of just like it didn't seem real at first. Like you get what I mean?
Yeah, because
Like,
slow to react. Like
yeah,
that's basically
I
what
think that's how
happens.
it
Yeah.
was. Like I was like pretty slow to react. I was kind of just like, so what just happened? And then
But you'll see people, bro.
yeah,
Some
it
of
was
them like
really
they
weird.
freak out. Like
Yeah,
some
yeah,
temperaments, they
yeah. So
freak
the other
out. Like
driver, he immediately got out of his car, but it took me to a while. Like I kind of just sat in the car. I was like looking around a
it's going
bit.
around.
And then I realized, oh wait, I should get out the car and like speak with
Yeah.
the other guy. Yes, that was pretty funny. Like I don't know if I was calm and collected, but I was definitely like slow to react, and like I didn't have like a, I never have like a over the top reaction to things, but it'll be more like slow to react or like maybe calm. I don't know if that's the right word because like in like on the inside, like I know how I feel. I'll be like bummed
Yeah,
out
yeah.
or
On the
whatever.
inside's
But
a different, but I was talking
yeah,
about more the manifestation on the external
right.
level.
Yeah. Okay. So
It's a
that
lot
yeah. So
different. Like
I
people just
can
think
agree
you're
on
just
that.
like, yeah, like you just calm and collect. But phlegmatics, they always have like, so it's really fascinating. It's like the water type.
Yeah.
So with this framework, it's like the more you sit with that element, the more you learn about that element in terms of people.
Right.
So for example, if you go, so for me, right, I was actually talking to a friend yesterday about this. It's like, because sometimes, not because of COVID now, but I would go like on lone trips on myself. Like we got Melbourne here, I drive down, I go up the coast, and I do lone like kind of holiday, kind of a few days, just drive on my own and go different
Oh,
places and
nice. Okay.
reflect. Yeah, so it's sort of a thing that I like doing. People, it's really fascinating. Some people are like, oh, what a loser, bro. What the heck?
Go by yourself.
It's like, people like, oh, why would you go to the movies by yourself? That seems like a loser thing to do. But
Yeah.
anyway, so it's like, but I enjoy that. Like, and so even in that, it's like you get opportunities to reflect on nature. And so for me, it's like you go to the ocean and you just sit with looking at the ocean views and sit with it, and you observe what the water does. And once you kind of unpack the deeper layers in terms of how that is working in nature, it's like you can understand the phlegmatic temperament more. So like with the water temperament, if you're looking at the ocean, for example, it's like it looks nice and peaceful. The waves are not coming, nice, and everything's, just doing its course, compared to like a
Right.
fire. Fire is just like destroying everything, right, in its path.
Yeah.
But like, in that, like once observing it, but when you observe the ocean, that's what you're seeing. But underneath the layer, there's so much going on. There's fishes happening, and there's different crustaceans moving around. It's giving life and support to others. So there's a lot happening beneath the surface. And not
Right.
only that, it's like there's depth to it, right? So the ocean,
Of
there's like
course.
you go down, there's a lot and lot. So that's like the phlegmatic. Phlegmatic on the surface, it seems like cool, calm, collected, which it is to some degree, I guess, in the external
Yeah.
sense. But like underneath the surface is where you have to unpack and let the sort of phlegmatic be themselves, because it's like that's where on the inside, that's what's going on. There's like a lot of things
Of
happening,
course.
and so people don't see that from the outside, though. So like for
Yeah.
example, the phlegmatic, if they may not firstly say, if for example they're going through a tough time, someone asks them, oh, how you going, bro? And just like, yeah, bro, just doing, good, bro. Like they're not gonna be like, yeah, bro, I'm, feel worst day of my life or something. Like they're just gonna kind of brush it off, saying, yeah, I'm all right. But then you gotta, like, if you're talking to the phlegmatic, you gotta say it like a few times. You gotta ask this question a few times until they're like, so since you bring it up, then they kind of go into everything
Yeah.
that's going on in their
Yeah.
life. So it's like it's really fascinating. Like that's the kind of relationship you see between like the phlegmatic water type in people and also in nature. So it's like once you reflect more on nature, you can see it in people more.
Okay, it's funny that you said like the whole the depth thing, because like on the surface of the water it seems like there's nothing going on, right?
Yeah,
It seems cool collected, but yeah, like as the further you go down, there's like, you know, full ecosystems, you know, all these types of animals you've never
100%.
seen
Yeah,
before. That's interesting. Does that have so um I don't know about you, but me personally, like I overthink a lot, right? I'm always thinking about like the different
yeah. That's
possibilities.
phlegmatic thing. Yeah,
Okay, is it okay? So so a lot of the time I'm thinking of like the next like five things to do, or like the different ways, something that I like, a decision that I make, like the five different ways I can go in. And something that I've been doing a lot more is like visualization. So like I'll visualize like the best possible scenario for something, and then like the worst possible scenario for something also, just so I can be ready for both. Or that's like how what I tell myself as well. That was kind of like how to mitigate the overthinking part, because I would always overthink like the worst case, but I'm like, no, also think about the best case, and that's kind of like how I tried to balance it. Um,
yeah, yeah. No, it's interesting you bring that up because, like, with the temperaments, each temperament is prone to something. So the fire temperament is prone to anger.
yeah,
From not, and it was really fascinating. It's like phlegmatic's actually prone to anger. So, like, when I was doing my readings and stuff and learning about it,
really,
so I'll explain it, right? So when I read it, I'm like, wait, but I don't get angry. But it's really fascinating the anger that it's perceived and how we perceive it versus how they talk about in the temperaments is different. So choleric or fire temperament they'll externalize their anger, right? They'll get quick to anger and they'll show it because they have a
they'll
lot of
show it,
energy.
right?
But like phlegmatics, they'll internalize it. You get what I'm saying? So you won't see it, but it
I
just
get
goes
it.
in within, and that energy kind of stays within. So like you might like it's really fascinating. Like people that you may have some angst with or are not happy with, you won't really like the phlegmatic won't just go up to them and express their thoughts and kind of be
Yeah,
disgruntled. They'll kind of act like cool, calm, collected, like how the phlegmatics do, but
yeah.
on the inside it's like kind of bottled up. And so it's like it's really fascinating in that sense. It's like we do show we have that anger, but it's like different. It's how it manifests is a lot different. It's more internal. It goes like it stays in. You get what I'm saying? So it's like
That's really interesting. Yeah, because I would always say that I'm very easy to like I get easily frustrated very like with people, with tasks, but I'll never show it. Like I'll always kind of just, you know, go about life, because for me it's like, you know, like why express it, like if this is just um like it'll just make things worse. Like that's kind of how I see it. Like I'd rather just keep it to myself, and you know I'll do the things that make me less angry after. But yeah, I've always noticed that like I get
yeah,
pretty easily frustrated. So that makes
yeah.
sense.
Yeah, and so like with the temperaments, it's like each one has I guess things that they are prone to. So the water temperament, the phlegmatic temperament will be anxiety. Sanguine, the air type will be obsession. Melancholic, earth type will be depression. Not to say the others don't won't have a
Okay.
form of depression, but the depression in this context is basically from the because melancholic, the earth type is more perfectionist based. So
Right.
they'll set like high expectations already, and so when they
Yeah.
fall short they'll go into that kind of depression mode. So
Yeah.
that's kind of that perspective of depression. And with the choleric, the fire type is anger. And so when you use that framework, it's like with the water temperament you're more prone to overthinking things and situations and getting to anxious thoughts and kind of get frustrated because of that. And some people have very extreme versions of that and stuff like that. And so I guess it's really fascinating because when you use like these sonic principles, it's like we should be trying to be as present as much as possible from the
Mm.
in kind of tazkiyah sense, or even with we have the conception of Allah's destined things for us. So it's like from that perspective, it's like whatever we will is like Allah's doing it for the best.
Yeah.
And so from our like from Muslim Islamic standpoints, like as our job is basically to just be good Muslims, right? And we let Allah kind of take us on
Yeah.
this journey and
Yeah.
trust His plan. So it's like
Like
when
living
you
in the
use those
present, pretty much.
exactly, yeah. And even like taking those into consideration, it allows, I guess, in some ways, the water temper to be a bit more balanced because you have these things in mind. Because if you don't have those foundations and principles, it's like can you go about life? Like, I don't know if you're not a person of faith, or if someone's an atheist, it's like everything's up for grabs. Everything, like,
Yeah.
what's gonna happen when you die, like what's gonna happen
Yeah.
tomorrow, like you'll just I don't know, like it's, I guess there's that fitra element in the sense that because it's there, it's like they may not, you don't see every atheist getting to that kind of state of mind. But in saying that, it's like if you don't have those kind of principles and foundations, it makes things a lot easier in the sense of mitigating anxiety in some ways if you use the Islamic principles. So it's like that's something to consider, as well as you mentioned visualization. Visualization for the phlegmatic is like such a powerful tool.
Definitely.
They can kind of almost picture themselves in situations where they can anticipate it happening and kind of work accordingly.
Yeah. You've
And
already like
so,
lived through it. So like when you actually do experience it, it's like, okay, you're prepared.
yeah. And so, and it's a skill of itself. Like you just got to learn it. And for me, I'm in that boat as well. I'm not like, I'm just trying to learn that kind of skill, but it does help so much, like in terms of getting day to day and able to achieve what you want to achieve. Like just really internalizing and imagining in your mind before actually succeeding in that sense is like a huge, huge tool, because you can kind of, if you internalize that, it's like that, it kind of builds that confidence, right? It's because you already lived it. It's like, why won't it happen? You know what I mean? So
For
it
sure.
really helps in some ways. But in terms of, I generally, like you mentioned, thinking bad scenarios and situations as well. It's
Mhm.
important to be cognizant in the perspective of, the dunya isn't perfect. It's not all going to go well and good. So, I understand that sentiment, but at the same time, it's like, I think for the phlegmatic, if you put yourself too much in a negative mindset, it's sometimes a bit difficult to get out of
Get
that
out of that,
mindset.
right?
You
Yeah.
wanna you wanna also build a network of people around you, and a network of friends where they're always having that positive reinforcement. Because
Of
the
course.
phlegmatic, it's really fascinating. The phlegmatic or the water temperament, they'll tend to remember like compliments from random people from like 5 years ago. It just kind of stays in their mind because it's like that's how they operate. It's like they, it'll allow them to do well, and they'll have that motivation if people actually acknowledge. It kind of comes back to the people pleasing aspect of the water
Hmm.
temperament. It's like once the people are actually appreciating and acknowledging what they're doing, or giving them even some, to some degree, like affirmation as well, positive reinforcement, it's like they'll have that kind of drive to do a bit better as well, because it gives them that kind of confidence and self-belief in that sense. So I think it's important to build that network of people around you. So it's important to have your group of friends on that kind of, you don't want like negative toxic friends,
Yeah.
because it doesn't facilitate healthy lives and healthy people. So it's like important to
Yeah.
have that network of people positive and making you wanting to do better and genuinely thinking the best of you and stuff.
For sure. So to the point of you mentioned of like living in the now and like living in the present and not really overthinking. I was reminded of a podcast I was listening to like a few days ago with I don't know if you're familiar with Safina Society with
Yeah, familiar
Dr.
with them. Yeah,
Dr. Shadi Al Masri, right? So he recently had Sheikh Mikhail Smith, who is Texas based right now. So he was talking about the concept of how every single uh every single second within a creation is a form of Allah creating uh so every single second of every single creation is another creation. It's basically another form of reality, right? So he used the example of a rose being red, right? The creation there is not the rose is always red. It's every single second that the rose is red is a different creation of Allah, right? So that's something that was mind
yeah,
blowing for me, right? So every single second that you're living is just you're living through a different, uh, a complete like a complete other reality every second that you're just being, right? So that was
yeah.
something that was like that blew my mind,
Yeah,
right? Because
even
you're
that conversation is really interesting. Like it's,
yeah,
subhanAllah, like even I guess theologically speaking and philosophically speaking, it's like you have a seed, right? It's a complete different entity. How does it be, I don't
right,
know, become a flower? Like that,
exactly,
like people, I guess scientists will say like, oh, there's this process and stuff, but it's a whole different thing becoming a whole different thing.
different thing.
You know what I'm saying? So it's like from the Islamic, or kind of speaking from the Islamic perspective, it's like Allah is in control of that kind of
Yeah,
process the whole time, creating that
it's
kind
it's
of
not
thing.
it's
And
not a seed and then it's a flower. It's a seed, a seed, a seed, a seed, a seed, and then something
yeah,
slowly happens every
exactly.
single second that it's there, and then it becomes a flower. People like hearing that, I think it like really blew my mind because like it really puts into perspective exactly like how powerful Allah is and like exactly how much Allah is in control of, but also exactly like
Exactly. And just, yeah,
yeah, and also like exactly just how much you really need to kind of just let go of like what's going to happen in the future, right? Because every single second is in the power of Allah. It's not in your control, right?
And just to make it a bit funky, I guess for the
I
philosophically
love
minded, it's like,
funky.
but it's like even time, how time passes. So I guess from theologically speaking, and some theological schools within Islam have proposed this, right? Um, Essentially, Allah is creating every single slice in time
Right.
as well, and so it's like even though right now time is passing, every second or millisecond is passing, I'm talking to you. Even in that millisecond, Allah is creating and like
Yeah.
creating, destroying, and creating again. Does that make sense? So
Yeah.
it's like
Yeah.
different. So it's like because time is created, right? It's like Allah is also creating each moment that passes in time as well in that kind of situation. So it's like
Yeah.
it kind of like subhanAllah, like I guess the whole idea, even with I think you mentioned was it the red roses,
Yeah. Yeah. The
different
rose.
colors. It's like even to take it even different lens, it's like we only perceive the red. It's not even red from the objective kind of standpoint. It's only red from our perspective, right?
Exactly.
So it's like, what is even like, I don't know, objective reality in that situation? Because like we only perceive just a small part of reality, like what the electromagnetic kind of field or wavelength in terms of the spectrum of light. Sorry, it's like there's so many different spectrums of light, and we're only seeing a certain section of the whole kind of field. So it's like how much of reality is actually existing and we don't know about, right? And
Of
so
course.
even like and just to add something, like I guess Islamically speaking, we know that there's a world of the jinns and all that. It's like reality that we don't even perceive. So it's like other things as well that we don't perceive. So it's really, really, I don't know. It's like how can the atheists be like, oh, it's all coincidence? It's like it's mind blowing in that sense. Subhanallah.
Yeah, subhanAllah, man. Um, I know we've been on for a while, so I do kind of want to wrap up, for the sake of your time as well. So I have a couple closing questions for you, and one of them I'll completely rip off from Boys in the Cave. So if you were to let me put a twist on it, right? Because so my podcast is called The Shaded Youth. Um, so let's say like you're under a tree and you're on a hot day, there's some shade, right? And you were to chill with three other people under that shade, who would those three be? And it can be from anywhere in time. And as your rule would say, it can't be prophets or messengers or anything like that.
um, so maybe an air conditioning guy would be good. Get an air
Okay,
conditioner for a hot day, but let's just assume there's air conditioning
All
involved
right.
out there. But nah, like it's really funny. Like how many times I've asked this question on the podcast is like, well, we've done like approaching 90 episodes, and I
Yeah.
still can't answer this question for myself. Like even though I've asked it to people so many times, it's
I've
hard to
noticed
like.
that. Like I was consciously thinking like, man, I kind of want to know what like Tanzim's and Raphael's answers are, because I don't think you guys answered it yourselves, right?
Yeah, subhanAllah. And for me, I think what I'll always kind of fall back on is people that shaped me.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously, like how we pose the question to the guests, it's from the perspective of assuming that the Sahaba and Rasul, they're all there.
Islam.
Excuse me, because everyone's just going to pick, Rasul and
Yeah,
Sahaba
of
anyway.
course, of
But
course,
I'll just assume they're all under the shade, as you
of
mentioned,
course.
anyway.
They're all under
And
the
I
shade.
can, yeah, and I just pick three other people. I think Imam Ghazali definitely the first one. I think I can't begin to explain. I don't know. I might get like it's just the impact, and sometimes words can't encapsulate meanings and feelings at times, And
Mm-hmm.
so for me, it's like the impact that Imam Ghazali has just had on me in all facets, in the sense of spirituality, in the philosophical sense. It's like
Right.
I think, especially in this day and age where we tend to there's that age of confusion, as I said, like as we talked about, like for example, Speakers Corner at least gave that Izzah for the Deen. And so like if
Right.
someone some certain things about Islam, it's like when you go about society, it's like you don't even encounter like it's not like I don't know, growing up and from the wider Muslim community, you're listening to all these kind of ideas and concepts that solidify your faith. You're just kind of being told like, oh, you're just Muslim, and this is Islam, and this is what we have to follow, and these are the principles we have to abide by and values we have, and that's about it. And you just kind of, depending obviously like what kind of family you're from, if you're from like a very Islamic family, it's a bit different, obviously. But in saying that, I find like a lot of the Muslim communities, like in this day and age, or especially living in the West, diaspora, kind of segment of community as well. It's like, how do you navigate all these kind of things in this day and age. And so like Ghazali for me, it's like, especially being close to Deen in this day and age, especially even in the West and the society that we're in, it's like Ghazali was a huge eye opener in the sense of, wait, like we have an intellectual tradition, wait, like these guys, you know, for example, pretty much identified the flawed thinking in Greek philosophy and articulate through philosophy. So using the tools that they have as well and refuting them. And it's like mind blowing, right? So it's like that kind of intellectual depth. And especially like, I don't know if people like, just a small recommendation for people, like if I think Deliverance of Error is a very small read. I have it in my library somewhere, but it's just, even reading a book like that, it's just like, whoa, like Islamic scholar kind of having this kind of book, a small book, but then it's just like so profound in the ideas and kind of concepts that he talks about in terms of refuting a lot of ideas that might be contradictory Islam, that was pretty much, I guess, prominent in some ways within his time, and he had to sort of refute. And so those sort of ideas, you can still see that in this day and age. And so it's like that book also allows, like, for example, skepticism, like you'll actually now conceptualizing and understanding what skepticism is, it really is able to formulate an understanding of, for example, someone comes up to you, or even online you see where people, it's easy to be skeptic, right? But it's like in the book he articulates, and at that time when I was reading, it was like many years ago, he was saying like, skepticism, it's like you have to be skeptic, like you can only, like, how far will you take that skepticism, like you have to be skeptic of your skepticism as well. It's like, whoa, like refuted whoever is a skeptic and calls them a skeptic. It's like, you know, you just tell them that, like, why don't you just be skeptical of your skepticism? And it's like, even just reading things like that, it's like, whoa, like it's like a huge like iman boost in some ways, right, from an intellectual perspective. So Imam Ghazali, for sure. And I think, sorry, I know I'm going on a tangent, but
all good.
But yeah, just even his story, just the way he had everything, and then in terms of being that teacher within the community, sheikh as well, and he left his teaching place and just lived a life of like a proper Sufi. I think that's like, I think it's easy to read about, but if you actually, because he was obviously a living person, when you, it's not just some story you're reading, right? It's actually like someone that had it all, right? Fame, glory, you know, knowledge, and he just left it all to get closer to God, and actually criticized the way that he perhaps was doing things, in the sense of, look, you know, if you have that kind of prestige in society, you're more prone to having an inflated ego and all that kind of thing. And so he actually like left all that to, you know, God, you know, get closer with God. And he even recounts like his experiences in that. So like, I think it's just really fascinating on all fronts from Islamic perspective. So Imam Ghazali, definitely number one. Number two, okay, this is a good one. I think for some reason I'm thinking out loud. I think maybe, I don't know, Ibn Sina is an interesting one. I know
That's an
some people will
interesting
be,
choice right after Al Ghazali.
yeah, like people will say like, you know, a controversial figure in some ways and this and that. My perspective is it's not something like solidified, and I don't say like people should follow it, but it's more like at the end of the day, so people, there's a lot of camps, they'll be like depicting him as, oh, you know, he's, I don't know, deviant because he held these views contradicting the Quran. So the famous one, for example, is Isa alayhi salam and the resurrection, right? And so like those stances he took is, you know, against Quran and Sunnah in some way. So they kind of you know, say that, was he actually like a proper Muslim? And I guess like, fine, like that's fair contention, right? But
Bro,
there's
if
also
him
the
and Al Ghazali were under that shade, they'd just be debating.
I'll just be watching the
You should be
vibes.
watching with popcorn.
But like, I think in some ways it's like, I can respect the kind of intellectual project that he endured, or he tried to do, and he did come up with a lot of philosophical arguments that we use, and people kind of forget that as well. And in saying that, a lot of ideas, like
I
for
believe he
example,
came up with the Kalam cosmological argument, right? Or was that someone
yeah, and
else?
it's also
Yeah,
like formulated by Ghazali as well. And so
right.
like, even like for, like one I mentioned at the beginning, the healing. There's like one book, kind of unpacking philosophical Greek ideas. But in not only that, it's like, for example, he came up with the flying man. I think it's called the flying man argument, where he's trying to prove the existence of the soul. And so it's like, for example, if you go on an airplane and you kind of jump off, what are you feeling at that time? Are you feeling your body, your head, your mind, or your brain, or like what are you actually feeling? And so that was kind of like almost trying to make an argument for the case of the soul, which is really fascinating in that sense. And not only that, there's firstly like proper intellectual in the sense of medicine and all that, but he's also written about the four temperaments as well. So it's all these kind of really interesting factors to consider in this discussion. And I had a teacher with talk with this, which we had on the podcast, Dr. Samir Mahmoud, as well. I consider him my teacher as well. And he pretty much is on the camp of respecting Ibn Sina in the sense of he was actually religious to some degree, in the sense of like, I think he would pray 2 rakat before, I think he wrote something or something like that in the masjid and stuff like that. And so like he's all that kind of camp in the camp of, he was actually like, I think brilliant individual and got to respect him to some degree, etc., etc. So it's like, for me, I think I really respect, I guess, the project is trying to just intellectually improve and uplift the Muslim community. So I can respect that project rather than kind of like going into particulars and being like, oh look, this is where he contradicted. I didn't think it was like an active kind of project he was trying to do. It was more so like the project was trying to uplift the discussion and community, and maybe he made mistakes along the way, sure, but yeah, so that's kind of how I picture him. The third one probably would be, so cricket is also a big part of who I am, because I don't know if I don't know if you follow me on Twitter intently, but like sometimes I've mentioned it in the past, where it's like I see a lot of parallels with spirituality in cricket. I don't know if cricket's like a big thing in the States.
Not really. Unfortunately,
so,
no.
But in like, so there's different formats you can play, and there's like test cricket, which is like goes on for 5 days, for 6 hours in a day, etc. I'm more talking about that particular format, the long format for batsmen. And this is because I'm a batsman primarily, so it's like from that lens. A lot of I think honestly, when I'm playing cricket and I'm out in the middle, so if people don't know cricket, it's like there's a pitch that's like, what, I don't know, 12 meters or something, and there's two batsmen in the middle having to bat, and there's like 11 players around him from the opposition team. And so in that moment, I already enjoyed cricket growing up, but then I think what took a turn, I guess, understanding temperaments, Islam, Deen, spirituality, etc. I was able to incorporate those kind of principles and ideas and values into when I play cricket. And so now when I play cricket, for example, it's more like I'm trying to get closer to God in some way, in the sense of, for example, you go to nice fields and grounds to play in, there's trees and sunlight and the sky, etc. And so since you're out in the middle batting, for example, in my context, you don't have your phone around, you don't have time to be distracted. You're pretty much with nature and the people around you that you're versing. And so because cricket, it's like the bowler delivers the ball and there's like a waiting period for the bowler to bowl again. In that time, you got a lot of time to yourself. And so you can actually, be spiritual in the sense of, doing dhikr and, praising God and looking at nature, reflecting on nature around you. So you got a lot of time in that sense. And so for me, it's like, if anything, it's like I'm more, if like I try to, from experience level, it's like, because we live in that age of distraction, right? Like work, uni, school, whoever. But when I'm like playing out in the middle, it's like I'm reflecting on nature. I'm able to think about, who I am as a person, or, really reflect. And that actually allows me to play better in some ways, because it's like your mind isn't focused on the game. It's more kind of in a different world. And then you're hyper focused when he's bowling, and then you just zone out again. And it's like, for me, I try to perceive, if anything, like I see it as I'm the most closest to God in some ways when I'm playing cricket in that context. Like, yeah, so it's really fascinating. So using that, and there's more, I can go into way more, bro, but that's just like one aspect of it. So it's like, that's why when I found like, wait, I can actually incorporate kind of these kind of Islamic values and ideas into when I play cricket, it's like, it was mind blowing for me. And so that's why I love cricket even more now. It's like from that perspective. But So because of that, it's like I'd have to pick like a cricket player,
Mm.
and it's a bit tough. Like who I'd pick, I'd probably pick someone close to my own temperament, but and one of the like probably greatest in the world, or in maybe this generation, but someone of like it's hard. Maybe a Virat Kohli. I don't know if you're familiar with.
I don't know any, bro. I only
He's
know.
not my temperament, but he's like one
Yeah.
of the best in the world, and
Uh-huh.
just the hunger. He's definitely a melancholic choleric for sure.
Gotcha.
Like
Okay.
you can see that passion in the field, and he's one of the best in his game. And so I've watched a lot of his interviews, and he's a very spiritual guy as well. And so it'd
Mm.
really be interesting to have a discussion with him and maybe give him dawah as well in the process, right? So um so that comes to mind. But yeah, like there's probably a lot of other, I think like another big one is Malcolm X as well.
Okay.
I'd probably have to chuck in if it's possible, get like be a cave, or maybe do a substitution of Ibn Sina for
Oh,
Malcolm X
if
or
it's
something.
from Malcolm X.
But possibly, but Malcolm X, like just I think discussion of itself about racism and how that manifests in
Of
society is a
course.
huge one as well, because
Yeah.
yeah, it's a big issue in our day and age. And I think especially how the structures of society and the society that we exist in, we see it through one perspective where it's about understanding, like for example for us, it looks like, somewhat middle class family, Bangladeshi background for like both of us. It's like we don't actually experience a lot of the experiences other people have in
Hmm.
different contexts, and it's about unpacking that and what they have to endure and suffer as well. So that's a whole discussion. So I think Malcolm X really, just really impactful. Muhammad Ali, even, like I think the impact they have had on like the world, it's
Hmm.
just subhanallah, like it's can't quantify it. Maybe like I don't think, like how many people
For sure.
I've heard many stories of people in America converted to Islam because they read autobiography of Malcolm
Autobiography of
X.
Malcolm X. Yeah. I had on Mamadou Tal a couple episodes ago, and we were extensively talking about Malcolm X. And the thing is, like, a lot of people always claim Malcolm X as, like, Malcolm X was Muslim, right? It
Yeah,
was an amazing example for our community, but I think they disregard a lot of his teachings, like
yeah.
before that final year when he went to Hajj, right? They just see that one year of, like, he went to Hajj, he became good, and then that was it. But like, he has a lot of
Yeah.
wisdom just prior to that, right? It's like,
Yeah, yeah.
bro, come on, like, the man, man was
Yeah, no,
he
like
had a lot to say.
yeah, like with that's a fascinating thing you brought up. I
Yeah,
got time, by the way. I don't know if you want to keep
I
going or
mean, yeah,
not.
you go for it, but
Okay, yeah. So
yeah,
like with Malcolm, like not just even in the context of Malcolm X, but just everything in life in general. What people tend to do, and especially if it, it could even within the intra-Muslim discourse, but let's just say from someone who's non-Muslim, what happens is when people are kind of operating in different frameworks and ideals or principles, they'll instrumentalize certain things for their own gain,
yeah,
for their own ideology, right? So I'll give you one example is like, because I've been talking to a lot of like, I guess, kind of Marxists, activists, and especially like with the Palestinian issue, you'll encounter a lot of people that utilize the Palestinian issue and instrumentalize in a way to promote their kind of secular ideals. For
right,
example,
yeah,
it's like, so when, for example, a Muslim says, "Oh, Palestine is a Muslim issue," they take issue with that. It's like, no,
they
but
get
it's like a
offended, yeah,
humanity or something
right.
like that, right? And so um even though I understand the sentiment, in the sense of, people should rally behind
Hmm.
the issues of Palestine, but at the same breath, it's like what happens is like their kind of ideology and baggage gets slipped in into the
Yeah, the
convo.
problem with that is they're kind of invalidating, like, the reason for why Muslims especially are upset, right?
Yeah,
They're kind
exactly.
of saying,
That
like, you don't have a reason to be more upset than, like, but the reason why Muslims take so much, offense, and they take Palestine personally, is because there's so much Islamic history in Palestine. Like, there's Al-Aqsa, and I think a lot of
exactly.
the Palestinians themselves would agree with that.
Yeah, and I think the other reason as well is because it's like they think Zionism is a religious issue, and
Right.
so we
Yeah,
don't
I
want to
get
talk
that
about
point.
Muslims
Right.
because it's like a religious, it's going to be
Yeah,
another religious issue or
I get
something,
that.
which like from our, we know that that's completely wrong. It's kind of like equating Zionism with, Islamic religiosity, which is like,
Yeah.
no, it's not the same thing, right? Like real Islamically speaking, we know if we're on the haq and the truth, it's like our way is like the objective. But even in saying that, and like these statements we can agree with, but we have Muslims in the intra-Muslim discourse, like in the context of Malcolm X, it's like they already have this, I guess, perception of Islam being a very spiritual thing to yourself, and that's it. So like the kind of aspect or idea of Islam actually being within society and forming and shaping laws and wider society is like out of the question. It's like, you actually like, are you actually practicing Islam in the sense of how Rasulullah kind of practiced it and saw it? Because all you're doing is you're actually abiding by secular ideals. You're actually like, it's not to say I'm just going to go around and say you're excommunicated from Muslim community because you see Islam in that way. Obviously the Muslim in Islam, right? But it's like the whole perception, the holistic version of what Islam is like kind of watered down in some ways. And so in our kind of context, when it comes to navigating politics in, especially in the West, it's like, people like, for example, like comes to my mind, Edward Said, Frantz Fanon. For me, like they've also been very, actually that's a good point. I want to add Edward Said for sure into the cave, into the
6 people now.
I forgot. Yeah, like
it's a big treat
because like what they've sort of unpacked and highlighted, and what I've come to understand now through my teachers as well, it's about, so in the context of, you have brown skin, white masks as one idea that's discussed, or like black skin, white mask, brown skin. In our context, like in, I guess in the Bengali community, what happens is like the white mask can be deemed as secular ideals, and then you're just a brown skin. So some people, they talk about the religion in a way, it's like, hey, look, just keep it to yourself, bro. Like, why do you have to show off about deen and do dawah and be so overt about it? We just want to get on with our life and so, which is, I understand, you don't want the kind of religiosity where it's in your face. But I'm, even from the perspective of a political standpoint, it's like they even view Islam in the sense of, hey, Islam has no role here. We just want to get justice. This kind of humanistic kind of perspective of justice, whatever that means. I don't even know what that means, right? But it's like, you can see it's like almost like white ideals coming out rather than kind of Islam. And so it's like, I don't blame them, because it's like, naturally what happens is when you grow up in a certain society in a certain way, the ideas of that society will, be natural. And for us, it's about like undoing those thoughts and really building Islam from the ground up. So it's like, even in that conversation, it's like, we want to be Muslim. So like in the Palestinian issue, we want to be firm, and because we see Islam not just manifesting on the spiritual but on the political level and bringing justice, right? And so we shouldn't hold back when we say Islam's Palestine is a Muslim issue, because we know Islamically, if we're on the haqq and the truth, we have the objective kind of standpoint. We like, I was talking, one of my teachers told me, in class, he asks, it's really fascinating and really interesting insight as well, where he talked about how, because he teaches at university in the humanities, and he goes into class in one of his one time, and he tells the students, mixed background, right? Like why, people of color, etc. It's like, you're all humans, right? He just says that. And it sounds like no one has an issue, no one bats an eyelid, like, you're all humans, right?
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, cool. Like, yeah, we're all human. We're all one humanity. Okay, cool. And then he's like, next thing he says, a statement, but you're all Muslim. They're all like confused, like, what the heck? Like, Muslim? Like, you get, agitated looks of confusion. It's like that kind of visceral reaction, maybe, depending on what temperament you are. But the idea he tried to highlight, and he was just saying, is that from the Muslim Islamic perspective, we have the fitra concept, right? And so for us, we should see like, I guess from moral perspective, or from the lens of Islam, people have that kind of inclination towards God already in them. So what's wrong with, it's just sort of saying Muslim, like, why should they feel agitated? It's because they're so embedded in that kind of that humanistic kind of lens of humanity, and we should all just come together and do that, which is fine, like obviously for oppression and all that, but I'm talking about kind of the ideas that are behind those statements and where it comes from, and how,
for sure,
because it's like, if you through human history, it's not like, oh, we're all one humanity and we should all come together. It's like that kind of idea didn't exist. It's actually a very modern phenomenon in that sense. And so we should be thinking from a Muslim perspective, is like, we should be very open about how we perceive Islam, because it's like we live in that society where it's like telling us to keep it to ourselves, right? And that's like the tussle at times. And so in the context of why I mention this is because in the Muslim context, we have groups of people in different sides of the spectrum. Like I guess one example is like Tablighi Jamaat is like more don't talk about politics. Then you have another like kind of politically overt group that are, you know, or we have to talk about politics all the time. Um, it it becomes an interesting part to kind of navigate within our own community spaces. And so what happens is, talking back to my instrumentalizing point, is like they'll instrumentalize Malcolm X to
Yeah.
their own agenda. And
Yeah.
so you don't want to do that. It's because you want to, you know, look at the actual holistic kind of picture, you know, and you don't want to
Mhm.
kind of, and we see a lot of Muslims, as you mentioned, like they instrumentalize in the sense of, hey, you just became Muslim after Hajj and it's, you
Yeah.
know, mashallah, hectic. But like that's like not even like, how many years was he Muslim, right? Like how many years he lived as a non-Muslim, right? And that
Yeah.
doesn't mean suddenly, or he's not, like, I think there's this weird perception sometimes back and white, or we shouldn't take him seriously when he was Muslim, but you know, when he's Muslim, yeah, like that, you know, it's like the finish line, yeah, we made it. But firstly, it's like, it's really fascinating. Like it sort of also highlights maybe perhaps they don't have that kind of understanding of the seerah, in
Yeah.
the sense of even how Rasul communicated with
Islam.
non-Muslims. Like Mutim bin Adi is like a famous example where
Yeah.
Rasul just kind of praised him to the point where it's like, I would leave, I think the exact term I can't remember off the top of my mind, but it's like, because he passed away and he gave refuge to the Muslims,
Yeah.
in some ways, like protection, because he was leader of his tribe. And so Russell some talked about him and said,
Islam.
you know, if he was still alive and told me to do X thing, I think it was like release these people or something, I would have
Mhm.
done so, or something like that.
Right.
So it's like really fascinating. Like he praised like this non-Muslim person such a high level, right?
Mhm.
And it's like unthinkable to see like a Muslim kind of leader do that, I guess, in these times, right? Because they have this kind of black and white version of, you know, Islam, non-Islam. But in
Yeah.
saying that, it's like we shouldn't shy away from, you know, especially like with Malcolm X's legacy and when he wasn't Muslim, right? Like the
Mhm.
ideals and principles he was striving for, which is like racism and how we should go about it, and the sort of experiences he had, and especially with the Nation of Islam, right? People think
Yeah.
Astaghfirullah, Nation of Islam, the guy, you know, called himself a prophet and we should
Yeah.
reject it. Like, yeah, like, but that's a very kind of surface level reading. Like, I think as a community, we need to be a bit more nuanced and unpack it a bit more. It's like, fine, yeah, I don't even disagree with that. But like, let's look, you know, under the surface a little more. It's like, what were the experiences of the oppressed at that time,
Of
right?
course.
Why did they gravitate towards the Nation of Islam? It's because
For
it
sure.
literally gave them like that kind of power and strength, right? To be able to achieve justice in the society. Because man, how powerful, and it's really fascinating, you can use it as a case study, right? Like Nation Islam, they're able to build own autonomous businesses that allow them to keep the money within their own communities and kind of build wealth in that sense. So in a society where they felt that you know, the wider society was, you know, extracting, you know, through capitalism, for example, extracting the wealth and the goods from their communities, because, you know, the black community went through a lot, and you had active, you know, kind of concerted efforts to destroy the kind of black you know, businesses in that kind of time. It's like this was a way to kind of facilitate sort of growth within their own community. So that's, you know, and there's so many other ways. Like obviously you can go into the discipline behind Nation Islam and what they did. You know, it's really fascinating stuff. And so unpacking that is a huge like discussion, and it needs to be discussed more in this day and age, especially navigating politics, because we can see especially like people may be interested in critical race theory or whatever, but you can see parallels of analyzing that in our own time. So for example,
Yeah.
in the Nation of Islam, what happened was they would, when it was like going into prominence, right? The government was pretty much trying to infiltrate the Nation of Islam, having double agents and stuff, right?
Mhm.
And that's
Yeah.
a way to kind of bring them down. So it's like any kind of situation, what we've observed reading through history, it's like where people, you know, oppressed communities are building sort of institutions from the ground up. It's like the government will try to find ways to find power over them because they see it as a threat. You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying? So it's like
Yeah.
you see that remnants of it now in the sense of when you have political discourse within Muslim community, it's like, you know, we have CV countering violent extremism kind of conversations where they try to like infiltrate masjids and get close with sheikhs and give them money because they will get this access to this masjid,
Mhm.
and you know, spying in the masjid. You have all these kind of manifesting. It's kind of, once you analyze these kind of political realities, it's like you can then navigate like what to do next. So that's why like
Mhm.
having that kind of proper in-depth analysis of what Malcolm X actually his life and what he's achieved, it's like really fascinating. It's really important because you're able to unpack these sort of deepest discussions that, you know, issues that still happen within our community. So I think there's a lot to unpack there, but it's just to see the kind of parallels and correlations in terms of the society that we are um, in the sense of white supremacy. And people think white supremacy is, KKK, but that's actually like, that's a way to kind of not talk about white supremacy for what it is. And so
Yeah.
it's about unpacking that. And as Muslims, it's like what our ideals should be and how we should approach these discussions instead of, oh, like he was on kufur, I don't know, the Nation of Islam, that means we should reject them. Like, what did that have to do with
Yeah.
Islam? Like, it's not that simplistic, right? It's a lot more at play. And the thing is, we have to observe is what is society propelling us to do, or what society is, and the
Mm.
nature and extent of it. Because at the end of the day, like the West, if it wants to be in control and in power, it would have to pacify the citizens and the people,
Yeah.
right? And I think capitalism is a good way to do that, where everything, the nature of exploitation and the fact that things are, for example, costs, living and living expenses are growing increasingly. And so what now is our focus is, oh, how to make more money, how to get by,
Yeah.
how, that's kind of like our only focus. And I guess
For
in the
sure.
conversation of that, and this goes back to our earlier discussion about social sciences and all that, they're phasing out these kind of fields of study where we can actually study oppression and history and how ideas are manifesting in within society. It's like we have to like you, society kind of propels us just to be capitalist Muslims and going
Mhm.
about, but it's like not in that kind of mindset or frame of mind to mobilize the community in order to try to free us off sort of oppressions and ills of society. And so it becomes even more difficult. And so it's like how the nature and the extent of how society is playing a role in that manner and pacifying the citizens. Not to say, see, that's the thing when you talk about this, people think, oh, you're just an extremist, bro, whatever. Like, what,
Yeah.
you're gonna do jihad now? Like, it's like, no, it's like, firstly, I'm actually drawing from different non-Muslim thinkers and scholars and philosophers that have already unpacked the ills in society and what we're going through. So it's like I'm just drawing from them and understanding the nature of how the nature of our reality at this point in time. So it's like a whole kind of conversation in of itself that yeah, it just requires a lot of understanding and reading. And so a lot of just going about, oh, just keep Islam to yourself, spiritual, it's like I
Mhm.
don't know, like so you just want to, you're pretty much adhering to the structures of society. And so what's Rasul Sallam's project at the end of the
So
day? If you read the
right.
Sirah, like the whole Sirah, right? It's like, I mean, in terms of how he gained power, pretty much making treaties and bringing tribes together, kind of destroying the notions of like, I guess in that in our context it's called nationalism, but in tribalism in their context,
Mhm.
destroying all that kind of fabrics of society. Because right now we live in that kind of nationalistic age. Like, how random is that? Like, the British kind of drew up random lines across a map, and for some reason we call ourselves like I don't know, Pakistani or Indian and Bangladeshi and stuff, right? No, Bangladesh is a different case because of the liberation, that's why we call
Yeah.
ourselves that. But
Yeah.
I'm talking about in the context of like Pakistan and India
Pakistan,
or any
India.
other
Yeah.
countries. It's like, the white man is drawn up for you, and for some reason you identify with
Mhm.
that nationalistic idea to such degree. It's like, because it's in our fabric of how society operates, right? For some reason, when we're playing sporting teams, like, I don't know, it's such hatred between two countries. Like, dude, you just lived in that country, that
Yeah.
land. It's like, why does it mean anything, right? But
I mean, I
that's
think
what
the
I mean.
sporting teams is
Yeah,
a bit different. Like they take more pride in the team. It's like Mamadou. I don't know if you follow him on Instagram. He's pretty funny on his stories. Because he reps the England team really hard. You know, they're all saying like it's coming home, right? So he posted this picture of
yeah,
like this black guy in this like really patriotic outfit of like England, and he was like, if you see me today dressed like this, like pretend like I'm not, like
yeah,
ignore it or something like that, right? And he's
yeah.
like, I'll stop critiquing imperialism until the finals are over, right? Like it's really funny. But
Yeah,
that's like, I think that's more pride in the team itself rather than like the actual country, you
yeah.
know,
Just
like just seeing
just
the effort of the team and stuff.
because I'll explain why I say that. Because like in our context here in Sydney, like if you talk about the footballing scene, like I think it's like the Greeks, the Macedonians, the Bosnians, like, man, the hostility is next level. There's clubs,
Oh,
like there's a
okay, gotcha,
Croatian
gotcha,
clubs, and then there's this, but then they absolutely hate each other's guts
gotcha.
because of
Okay,
like nationalism basically.
Yeah,
And so you see that it's not just prominent in like in these circles, but just in globally, right? Like when
gotcha.
two nations are like playing, you see that kind of hatred for like people. It's like it's so weird, right? It's like you were just born in that land, like why
Yeah.
see it more differently anyway. So it's
I
like,
got you. Okay, okay, I kind of
yeah,
see
so
that.
like,
So like with like in America, like I don't know, we don't really get too up in arms about like a lot of these like global sports like cricket or soccer. There are fans, but I don't think we get too passionate about it. But stuff like basketball, like the NBA, right? You'll see
yeah,
like
yeah.
two states, right? Like New York and like we were not in the finals. It's unfortunately no, but like play like the states will like get very patriotic and up in arms and stuff like that. So I can kind of understand that point.
Yeah, and like if, like in that context, it's like fine, and since it's just friendly,
Yeah,
you're
it's
supporting
friendly,
team, but like,
it's nothing too.
but there's a different like ugly side of sports where it's like proper racism and
Yeah,
it's
I
like
get that.
hatred for countries and each other and
Uh-huh,
people. But so like, and in religious like Islamophobia as well in that. But in
for
saying
sure.
that, it's like going back to the point, I guess in the Sierra Rasul, it's like
So,
tribalism was so prominent, and there was almost like hostility towards tribes because of that tribalism drawn up, because you're not from this tribe or
mhm,
that tribe and all that. So it's like how Rasul some like
so,
brought Islam about is like combining all these tribes, the Aus and the Khazraj, to make them the Ansar. It's like amazing how that kind of operated, even though they had hostilities within each other, right? And that's kind of like how Islam was able to kind of destroy, I guess, the kufr kind of fabrics within that society and bring people together. Not to say like it was all perfect and dandy afterwards, but it's about kind of addressing the societal way wrongs, right? And so if you just kind of, it wasn't like Rasulullah just kind of
so,
meditated at Cave Hira and the whole life and that's it, right? It's like there's a different thing at play, right? And I think for us, it's about seeing Islam in that sense and really being open and holistic about what Islam is. Because even the notion of dividing the spiritual from the political is like a very modern phenomena. Like it wasn't seen as kind of demarcations on that front. Not to say like some Sahaba didn't get involved with like political discourse and discussion because he saw there was a lot of issues and a lot of bloodshed. That's a different discussion, but I'm talking about how the modern take of it now, it's very demarcated. Like you can see both, like I guess from Islamic perspective, there's a perspective of having those both elements and seeing it as one, not like one or the other. And so yeah, it's really understanding Islam in that holistic sense. And it's hard to, when you live in the Western ideas that you just sort of grown up with. And yeah, like going back to the Malcolm X point, it's like unpacking those kind of aspects of not just looking at it as, oh, he became Muslim later, let's celebrate. It's more, it's a lot deeper than that, right?
for sure. Um, yeah, we're Jazakallah khair for that last question. We were ending
Yeah.
off the bang, bro. So thank you so much for hopping on. Um, just one last thing. Do you have any advice for me in like running this podcast, and because you've been doing it for like a few years now, so I'd love like any advice or like any tips you have on running it or like maintaining it or prolonging it.
It's a good question. I think maybe it's something I didn't probably touch on today, and I think it's probably the most important thing is just
Mhm.
um intentions may get clouded. Like I guess some
Mm,
people start the project and have obviously intention, and I'd like to think I had that as well when I started Boys in the Cave, doing for the sake of Allah, seeing a need and being not being fulfilled in the community and trying to address that vacuum in the community. But at the same time, it's like for me, I'm not like some big figure or anything like that, but some people within the community who listen to our podcast and stuff um will naturally have this kind of high opinion of me or see me as this like big type of person or whatever, right?
right.
And not even just that, it's just the fact that, like, for example, if I go somewhere and people know me and they're all coming to talk to me, it's like what happens is like the ego kind of you have to fight the
Gotcha.
nafs and the ego, right? And in that sense, like with any podcast, when you get big guests or big sheikhs and all that, you naturally your followings will grow and people will tune in, and
Mhm.
you get associated with that person, and people I don't know in your locality would be like, oh wow, you did that thing with that sheikh and whatever. And I think within that, what happens is we need to make sure that the intentions stay pure. It's not always going to be, it's always going to go up and down, but it's always having that at least self-reflecting upon like, wait, am I taking a pause to think, hey, like, am I actually doing it today for the sake of Allah? Like, I need to like calm myself down, be balanced, and really rethink about that. So that's one side of things. I'll go into in terms of like, I guess, yeah. So there's that aspect to really make sure it's at our forefront. The other thing would be, I think podcasts, most of it is a lot of it. Obviously, we have the conversation, and there's different processes. Like, for you, you mentioned how long it took you to get me on, reaching out different channels and stuff. So like, I can relate, bro. Like, I had people, like, guests that I went back and forth with over the span of a year and a half, and eventually got them on, right?
Nice.
And so it's a struggle. So there's different aspects of the podcasting that's, it's not easy.
Yeah.
But I would generally say, perhaps, like, depending on the nature of the podcast, like, if it's like requires a lot of research beforehand, obviously you need to spend a lot of time on that. But if you wanted to grow it, the marketing, I think, is just like, most of the time it's be on the marketing, honestly. Like,
Mm.
if you really want to grow it, sharing on different like Facebook groups, and sending to people's DMs, and kind of like doing like really different weird stuff, and even like, I guess, the graphic pictures, like, if you that's from the perspective, if you really want to grow it. But in saying that, you should come back to the intentionality part. It's like, we should do all that. I'm hoping we are benefiting someone with our content, rather than kind of seeing it as, I just want to grow my podcast, I just want to get the
For
numbers. I
sure.
think, like, even for me, like, I wouldn't even like, because we, like, Boys and K, we started like really early in the game, to be honest, compared to some other podcasts. Like, a lot of
Yeah.
podcasts are coming out now, and we started like a long time. And even something like Five Pillars podcasts, and Blood Brothers podcast, like, they started way later. And you see the numbers,
Yeah.
bro, they got like huge numbers compared to us. We're not like that big, but they started way later. But in saying that, it's like, that shouldn't phase me, right? Like,
Hmm.
because that doesn't really, like, truly doesn't really phase me. Firstly, because it's like, I'm trying to provide conversations in a particular thing, and that's my objective, and I want to try to do it for the sake of Allah, to the best of my ability, because I want people to have access to these conversations that normally wouldn't be happening. And so it's like, kind of goes back to the purpose and intention. It's like, that's why I want to market it more. It's because I just want a few people to come across it, and hopefully it helps them out. Like, and I had a friend, one of my close mates lives nearby to me. He kind of messaged me saying, oh, I have a revert friend listening to your podcast, because he's like very new into
Hmm.
Islam. It's like, I think it helps, because there's a lot of kind of content where you think it might come across as really bad, like Islam seems so harsh or whatever, especially with the
Yeah.
revert. But like, for us, it's like, I'm not, because we're a bit more balanced and chill as well, so it's like not too in your face, as well as kind of unpacking spiritual things that would be difficult for people to access. So it's like, as I'm saying, like, why I'm going to this tangent now is because of the passion for what I'm trying to do, other than going for the numbers. I think it's a big deal. And if you don't worry, I think it's like a temperamental thing. If you actually worry too much about numbers and things, you'll get more anxious, and it's not a good mental state to be in,
For
regardless.
sure.
And so see it as a long run thing as well. I think
Mm.
it helps if you just see, look, I'm doing it for the purpose of providing these conversations, like, even for yourself, like, even like, speaking from my own personal experience, I have access to, excuse me, like, people in my local community that people from other kind of platforms and backgrounds don't have access to, who I know are very intelligent. So it's like, that's why I'm doing one thing, because I want to give them a platform, because I know they're very intelligent, like, thinkers. And so that could be the same for you. It's like, in your local community, people that aren't the kind of internet savvy type people, or don't have social media following, but they're incredibly intelligent, or they might be the most intelligent people. It's like, let's have a conversation with them. I'm actually doing a favor in some ways, for my community, to get this guy out, because like, people be like, oh wow, this is actually my interest, I can link with them. And I've had these like emails and stuff as well, messages from people saying, look, oh well, you had this person on, I'm actually doing this study, I've searched all on Google and internet to find resources, I haven't found it, can you link me up with this person, or
Mm.
something like, you get what I'm saying? So it's like,
Yeah.
it's like, you don't see the benefits. Like, if you only see it on a materialistic perspective of numbers, it's not going to work, because it's like, a lot of the world is a lot more multi-dimensional, multifaceted, right? Even just like one listener, even if you get like 5 views, one listener could impact that one listener for the rest of their life. Like, wouldn't you like that? Like,
Yeah.
I would like that. Like, in Islam, like, why worry too much about all the numbers? So I think, in saying that, not getting caught up in two numbers, but also being consistent. Consistency at the end of the day is key. Like, for us, I wish we could maybe have done an episode a week on release, but it would have been too hard. because especially we do episodes for like 3 hours or something. And so that's why we did the fortnightly schedule. But we've been alhamdulillah consistent for over 3 years now. Like almost every fortnight, maybe a month we didn't post, but pretty much we've always been posting every 2 weeks. And so just having that level of consistency, you'll be surprised, man. Like early on, we didn't get that many, maybe like only like 500 listeners per episode, like early days, like when we first started, right? 400, 500. We thought like, it's a big win, right? And what happens is like when you're consistent and have all these kind of material, and then you get that one big guest or that one big viral episode, people actually tune into all your previous ones because they're like, oh, I like this content. So it's like you're actually setting the stage for, that moment. So like that's happened with us basically. Now it's like alhamdulillah, tens of thousands of downloads per episode kind of thing, but it didn't happen like overnight, right? It took like a good year of just going consistent with only a few hundred. Does that make sense? So it's like,
yeah,
you just being consistent, not worrying about the numbers, and let the content speak for itself. And yeah, marketing, big thing. Marketing, I think majority of the effort should go to marketing in general. And one other thing, and I think with your Twitter, if I haven't looked at it closely, but I remember like coming across your Twitter profile. So I saw you message me once, and so it's like if you're like, because you're sort of in Muslim Twitter, I guess, right? And to some
not too
degree,
much, honestly. Not too,
yeah.
like I've kind of deleted Twitter like in the past like 4 months.
Okay, fair enough.
Yeah,
Because like if you're in those kind of communities, it does help a lot. Like
gotcha,
on Facebook, I'm in kind of Muslim Facebook a bit. In Twitter, I'm in Muslim Twitter a bit. So it's
gotcha.
like
Okay,
if you're in those circles and not kind of putting, promoting your podcast, up to people's faces, it's just
just
being
engaging.
yourself.
Okay,
And then just on your bio and stuff, just writing, you have this content. People actually tune in. And I've had like, even on Clubhouse, I've had that. Like, I don't have many followers on Clubhouse, but like I've been on Clubhouse quite a bit. And I've noticed like that actually does work because like people just check out your profile, check out the thing. Cause I get the notification if someone follows me on the Boys in the Cave thing. So it's like you see that familiar face from the Clubhouse. I'm like, okay, it's because like they went on my
okay.
profile and check. So it helps a lot. Like even just building your own social media profile, just being you, and then kind of having your stuff in the bio just kind of helps as well. So that's from a marketing perspective. But yeah, I don't know if you had any other specific questions, but that's just to
That
sum it
was
up.
about it, bro.
Intention, yeah.
I'd love to talk a bit more about with you about all this stuff, but Juma's like right around the corner for me.
Okay, sorry, I took a bit of your time.
No, good man. Like I would love to discuss this a lot more. Inshallah, we have you on for another episode. I have your number now, so it'll be a lot easier this time. Jazakallah khair once again. I'm sure the audience will benefit greatly from all the stuff we discussed. Philosophy, university life, and now even podcasting. If anyone's interested in that. So yeah, thanks again, man. To all the listeners, Jazakallah khair for tuning in. It's not just a video podcast. YouTube is like where most of my traffic is, but like we also have audio versions on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and pretty much like most of the audio platforms. So whatever you are, just check it out, inshallah. And yeah, see you guys next week. And Tanzim, Jazakallah khair, bro. Hope you have a nice day. And
You too.
yeah, bro. Salam alaikum.
Wa Salam. Take it easy. Enjoy Juma.
You too, man. Also, I just realized I forgot to say the dua at the end. So, subhanakallahumma bihamdika wa nashhadu an la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa atubu ilaik. Peace, guys. See you guys next week.